Okay, let's speedrun this intro because I have a feeling this video is gonna go long. Remember that anime tier list that the Anime Men released a while back that everyone hated? I'm doing that, but good. The main differences for my version are that I watched 3 episodes per anime instead of 1, I'm thoroughly explaining myself as I go, so even if you disagree with me, you can understand why I gave the rankings I did, and I have a set of loose criteria to follow to keep things as consistent as possible. Those being how much I enjoyed the viewing experience, how well the first 3 episodes served to make me want to keep watching, and how good the anime is on a more technical level. Now before we really get started, I will mention that this video is part 2, but you don't actually need to watch the first one to follow. The only real difference is that part 1 was pre-1990, and this video is 1990 to 2025. Still, link will be in the description if you're interested. With that, let's get started. Just keep in mind that this is all based on only the first 3 episodes of each anime. If the show changes past that point, it won't be reflected in this video. Also, check out the Ads VT channel. If you're watching this on release, I'm doing a VTuber debut stream at 1 PM Eastern Standard Time today. You can also expect 3 uploads a week over there and regular live streams. That is all. 1990. Nadia, The Secret of Blue Water. Nadia, The Secret of Blue Water is an anime that's inspired by the book 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. I have read it, but it's been so long that I don't really remember much, so I won't be talking about that element of things. It's set in the late 1800s in France, and it takes enough liberties that I would consider it alt history. There are a couple of different plot lines that all kind of converge on one another. The protagonist, Jean, is a young boy with a passion for invention who wants to find his father who had gone missing and is presumed dead. The titular Nadia is a former circus performer who is strongly implied to have been a slave. She wants to find her homeland, which is somewhere in Africa. She's not even sure where exactly she's from. And she carries with her a piece of vaguely magical jewelry that is the titular Blue Water, which is being hunted by the antagonist, who's this cartoony villain with bumbling henchmen. There's also something with a sea monster that's actually a machine, and the US military is involved, but that hasn't really been fully developed as of episode 3. There's a lot going on and not everything's been set up yet, but there are a lot of positives I'm seeing so far. Particularly, each of the first 3 episodes had a clear purpose. Episode 1 introduced our 2 primary characters, got them together, and made us like them. Episode 2 got them out of their comfort zone and had them start moving things forward. Episode 3 added an element of danger and intrigue that's almost certainly going to be explored more once they start moving things underwater, which I'm sure is something that's going to happen long term. So on a writing level, even though the main brunt of the story has not really kicked off yet, there's definitely seems to be strong foundations being laid. And the experience of the first 3 episodes is enjoyable, even without a whole lot of stuff to sink my teeth into. The villains add a nice amount of action and comedy to break up the tension, the light steampunk and fantasy elements of the story are exciting, the general coloring of the anime is beautiful, and there are some strong emotional moments with Nadia that leave me eager to see where they go with her story. That being said, there are some negatives as well. Sometimes the story doesn't trust the audience to figure things out on their own, leading to lines of dialogue clearly meant for the audience like a verbal statement acknowledging that the sea monster might not actually be a sea monster, seeing as it shot a fucking torpedo at them. Audio balancing was an issue, with the music often drowning out the voiceover and other important sound effects. As I said with Flash Kicker in part 1, there is no excuse for a professionally produced anime to have this issue. Sometimes certain parts of the show are kinda blurry and out of focus, though I can't tell if this is an actual technical hiccup or if it's just a preservation issue. Because there are some noticeable other artifacts that are definitely the latter. And lastly, in the background of one scene, I noticed that the word China was misspelled. I know it's not important, but how do you fuck that up? But overall, this was a fun experience, and it does seem pretty promising at the end of the day. A tier. 1991, Dear Brother. Dear Brother is a shoujo high school drama anime, and one thing I should get out of the way is that there's a tiny chance that 29-year-old American men are not exactly the target demographic of this show. Joking aside, Dear Brother was not made for me, and I fully acknowledge that fact. And what makes that even more significant is I feel like Dear Brother is the kind of show that hinges on being relatable. Broadly speaking, the 2 approaches writers can take in regards to the emotional elements of a story are either they bring you into what the characters are feeling from the ground up, or they draw upon feelings you're already familiar with to establish a baseline they can then build off of. Dear Brother very much leans into the latter strategy, and that's why I feel like the target demographic thing is so important. If you can't relate to the characters on screen, a lot of what this show is trying to do simply isn't going to resonate. And I do not relate to a high school drama experience as someone who's been working full-time for the better part of a decade. And even when I was in high school myself, my experience was relatively conflict-free and my school didn't really have stereotypical cliques. And with over 2,000 kids, yes really, my graduating class was 550, it was impossible for an actual social hierarchy to form. So when Dear Brother is telling this story of two-faced backstabbing, social exclusion, and teenage bitchiness, my gut reaction is not a pang of sympathy for the protagonist Nanako. It's, hey dumbass, stop associating with these assholes and stop caring about dumb high school bullshit and your problems will cease to exist. That is not the reaction I'm supposed to have. And on top of that, a lot of the framing of the story is that Nanako is telling her story via letters to a former teacher who she refers to as Oni-sama, or the titular Dear Brother. She has a very flowery and poetic style of writing, which I normally tend to like, though it does depend on context. However, it's kinda hard for me to take it seriously in this particular context. With Nanako specifically, with her specific problems, it really just sounds like a child desperately trying to pass themselves off as an adult before they've had any meaningful experience with the struggles of life. It just doesn't hit the way the writers clearly meant for it to hit because I simply do not relate to this person. There's also clearly some Yuri stuff that's going to be happening, but that hasn't really gone anywhere as of the 3rd episode. Maybe the way that's handled might change the way I think about things here, since I do tend to like Yuri stories, but I really can't say for sure. That being said, there is one thing I will praise the series for, and that's the visuals. It's very stylish, all things considered. The character designs are interesting, sometimes there will be still frames that are done in a different art style to highlight an emotional beat, and there are a lot of creative angles and simulated camera work that gives it a unique visual identity. But overall, my opinion has actually gone down since I first watched it, and I didn't particularly like it then. While I do think there's a contingent of people who would really enjoy what Dear Brother has to offer, it's just way too reliant on the audience thinking and feeling a certain way, and it just doesn't do any of the work to bring us to its level. D tier. 1992, Yu Hakusho. I knew going into this whole project that I was going to be watching a decent amount of shonen. I mean, some of the anime I'm going to talk about later on in this video include Demon Slayer, Hunter x Hunter, Bleach, Naruto, Solo Leveling, and Jujutsu Kaisen. My experience with shonen, particularly the more modern shonen, has been relatively middling. I don't dislike it, and it's definitely fun, but many shonen series have deep structural issues with the writing or play things extremely safe to the point where they lock themselves into being good and out of being great. And rather than pushing for a high-quality, unique story, they replace good writing with spectacle and, as the kids would say, aura farming. Again, not an unenjoyable experience. I like pretty animation and flashy fight scenes as much as the next guy. But I'm a story and characters guy. Muv-Luv is my favorite visual novel series not because it has some of the best action in the medium, which it does by the way, but because it has some of the best characters, best themes, the best emotional moments, and a rock-solid hard sci-fi system. To put it simply, I need something more than surface-level appeal to really satisfy me. So I admittedly went into Yu Hakusho with a bit of a bias, assuming it was going to be, for lack of a better term, generic shonen slop. Well, I'm going to have to eat my words because Yu Hakusho actually has some really great stuff going on. The basic premise is that the main character Yusuke is a delinquent who dies saving a young child from getting hit by a car. For his heroism, he gets the chance to earn his life back. While that hasn't really kicked off just yet, it looks like it'll be a lot of fighting evil spirits with the help of a Shinigami and a number of other characters we've yet to meet. Pretty solid premise for a superpowered shonen. But here's the thing, while it kinda feels like it's pretending to be a generic shonen, I feel like it's doing a ton of work to set up a really strong character-focused story. The series is still in its setup phase, and I know there are still main cast members who are yet to be introduced. But the thing that really struck me is that Yusuke's death was not treated as just a plot device. While it is what gets the story moving, it's also used to explore the life of this troubled young man and the connections he's built. As I'm sure most of you know, death has a way of stripping away the bullshit surrounding someone. Those left behind suddenly realize that there's a lot of stuff that doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things. And what you're left with is who they really were at their core from your perspective. So with a short sequence showing the day leading up to Yusuke's death, we're introduced to the many characters in Yusuke's life. His alcoholic girl failure of a mother who's clearly not a good parent. His friend who is the one person who simply does not take his shit, while also being the only one who sees the person behind the fearsome reputation. The teachers who consider him a lost cause and villainize him. The teacher who is strict but treats him fairly. And the rival who's an absolute gremlin that has tried and failed to beat him in a fight over 100 times. Then, after a short back and forth with the Shinigami, we get Yusuke's wake. He assumes that people will be happy that this burden on society is gone. But while some people are being disrespectful, the mother he thought didn't care is openly grieving. The friend he thought didn't like him is hurt knowing that she'll never see him again. The teacher he thought hated him is angry because the potential he saw is now never going to be realized. The rival who constantly tries to kick his ass is upset because his respected opponent is no longer here. And even the boy he saved shows up with his mother to pay their respects. Total strangers who will go their whole lives grateful to have met him. This all happened in the first episode, and in a very short amount of runtime, we got a deep, humanizing look at these characters, and it really makes you feel things. And without going into spoiler territory, because I do think this show should be experienced for yourselves, The next 2 episodes also have clear targeted goals, and it really felt like the writers were approaching this story with a sense of purpose. They knew exactly what they wanted to achieve and managed to do it before we've even really gotten the chance to spend time with these characters. As I said earlier, I'm basically eating my words here. There is a lot going on, and I'm really excited to see how these great ideas that have been set up grow over the remaining 109 episodes. S tier. 1993, Slam Dunk. Slam Dunk is a basketball anime that's over the top and silly, but in a very good way. Like many other anime in this video and the previous, as of episode 3 it's still in its setup phase. So far, it's following the tried and true story trope of protagonist dislikes activity but eventually grows to love said activity and excel at it. Our protagonist Sakuragi has a dislike of basketball for one simple and silly reason. He's been relentlessly trying to get a girlfriend for a while now. However, due to a combination of him having absolutely zero game, and the fact that his short temper has given him a bad reputation, he's currently on a streak of 50 consecutive rejections. The most recent one rejected him because she was interested in a guy on the basketball team. So now, Sakuragi hates basketball, which he immediately 180s on when he meets a girl named Haruko who doesn't know his reputation, who happens to be obsessed with basketball. So now he's all about basketball. And the fact that this is a very silly motivation really plays into the general vibe of the show. In general, everything is turned up to 11 for comedic effect. He's never happy, he's fucking ecstatic. He's never sad, he's absolutely dejected and has to be held back from throwing himself off the roof of the school. I did criticize Candy Candy in part 1 for this kind of thing, but that was because it took itself too seriously while simultaneously being a caricature of human emotion. In contrast, Slam Dunk is very self-aware, and these moments are funny for how absurd they are, with silly animation gags and all. It honestly has a lot of aesthetic similarity to a hypermasculine battle shonen like Fist of the North Star, which I also covered in part 1. But just because it is funny doesn't mean there isn't anything underneath the hood. In fact, I was pretty impressed by the setup being done for the web of character dynamics, which is no doubt going to be a source of continuing conflict. Sakuragi in particular is impressive with how he's both kind of a violent asshole, but also really likable, which is a difficult balance to strike in the early parts of a story. And a lot of that has to do with Haruko. Haruko is the love interest, but is currently kind of a side character. However, she is central to basically the entire plot. Aside from getting Sakuragi into basketball, she has a crush on the star rookie, which leads to a rivalry angle. She also happens to be the sister of the captain of the basketball team, who Sakuragi manages to piss off in the 3rd episode, leading to another rivalry angle. So pretty much everything is connected to her, but there's another factor. She's kind of a standout character, and I don't think the writers intended for her to be, at least not this early into the story, and there's one reason for that. I think her voice actress, Akiko Hiramatsu, fucking killed it. Like seriously, based on the first 3 episodes, I think her voice performance was the best, and it's not even close. While this is something to praise for sure, it kinda stole some of the thunder from the characters who are supposed to be the focus right now, which felt a little weird from my perspective. Granted, the voice actor is too good is probably a good problem to have. But overall, this was a fun experience, and I'm told it only gets better as the long-term story gets more fleshed out. That being said, it's not all positives. One of the things that bothered me was the lack of consistency in the character art. To put it simply, proportions changed all the fucking time. Not for comedic effect or anything, heads just kinda grew or shrank at random from scene to scene. I'm not the kind of person who demands absolute technical perfection in my anime, but I'd at least like some consistency. Also, I wasn't completely sold on the rivalry between Sakuragi and Haruko's crush, though that's likely because he's a kudera character, and those are kind of intentionally difficult to figure out until you're knee-deep into their story. It's a high-risk, high-reward character archetype, but it's not going to do much in the early parts of a story. So at the end of the day, Slam Dunk does have some issues, but what I saw is solid, and assuming it keeps the momentum going, there's a really good story brewing. And I'll probably end up coming back to this one at some point. A tier. 1994, Sailor Moon S. One thing I mentioned in part 1 is that this list of anime is ripped straight from the Anime Men's original video with no alterations, and I suspect it's a product of ChatGPT, which is why there are some issues that crop up here and there. One of those issues is with Sailor Moon S. S specifically is the 3rd season of 5 in the Sailor Moon series, and it was abundantly clear to me that it assumes you watched the first 2 seasons already, which is absolutely fair from a writing perspective. But I haven't watched any of Sailor Moon before, which is a bit of a fucking problem. And no, watching like 80 extra episodes of anime just for this section of the video isn't really an option. I already spent over 60 hours watching anime for this project as is. No, really, 3 episodes per anime times 63 different series equals more than 2.5 full days of anime. So this leaves me in a bit of a predicament. Sailor Moon S is at its core pretty endearing. I love the visuals and the character design. The action isn't bad, and the humor is pretty good for what it is. But I have no idea how anything works. I have no idea who most of these characters are. I don't know anything about the plot or world building. When two characters are talking, I have no idea what their dynamic is supposed to be, what they've gone through together, and how their individual character arcs influence the current state of affairs. That's because that was done in the preceding 2 seasons. I genuinely can't tell if Sailor Moon S is building on things that were set up earlier, or if it's just making shit up and falling flat. My intuition says it's probably the former, but I just don't know for sure. I'm definitely interested both based on what I saw, and because I know that Sailor Moon is one of the cornerstones of the magical girl genre and of anime as a whole. But I think I have to do something I did twice in part 1. I'm gonna have to put Sailor Moon S in the special unrankable tier. This is the only time that'll happen in this video, but I just don't think I can give Sailor Moon S a fair judgment without the context of previous seasons. I don't think it's actually possible. 1995, Neon Genesis Evangelion. Full disclosure, I had actually watched about half of the series well before working on this video, so this wasn't a blind watch. But I don't think that changes anything I'm about to say. Neon Genesis Evangelion is a video essayist's wet dream, and I say that as a video essayist myself. I'm not even kidding, the way this series is built feels tailor-made for pretentious video essays. Specifically, the dark psychological themes, gritty plot, and symbolism that's so over the top it's borderline impossible to miss. Seriously, the protagonist Shinji is motivated to make a difficult decision by the fact that he literally has another character's blood on his hands. It's not subtle. Point being is that it's very easy to sound smart when talking about Neon Genesis Evangelion because it's so upfront about what it's doing, where other stories will often require a bit of digging to understand what they're going for. This is not necessarily a bad thing. I'm usually not a fan of what I call writers not trusting the audience to figure things out for themselves and being too overt about the things going on underneath the hood. But with writing, there are always exceptions. Neon Genesis Evangelion is one of those exceptions, and there's one singular reason for it. The anime is very clearly meant to be an emotional tidal wave that continuously smacks you in the face. It rejects subtlety so that it can be overpowering. On the surface, Neon Genesis Evangelion is a mecha anime where the titular Evangelions are used to fight against kaiju known as angels, which have brought upon a world scarred by destruction. Not full-on post-apocalyptic as society at large is still functioning, but definitely post-calamity. But really, Neon Genesis Evangelion is a story about trauma and how it affects the 14-year-old Shinji since he's been essentially voluntold into being an Evangelion pilot. His story is that of a kid who starts out already kinda fucked up and then just continually wades through a gauntlet of physical and emotional trauma. Even if I didn't know that going in, it's kind of obvious that's where things are going. As I said earlier, this show is very in-your-face and it's intense. When Shinji is training in his Evangelion, he repeats his instructions like a mantra because he needs to latch onto something as a coping mechanism. Several scenes feature an aggressive use of color, silhouettes against a red background to highlight the intimidating hostility of the government facility, a jarring cut from a gritty action sequence to an all-white hospital room that's almost painfully bright, red flashes when Shinji suffers physical pain in battle. And again, it's basically just punching you in the face with this stuff. But on top of that, the show is very methodical and it isn't afraid to let things breathe. It's never in a rush to get to the next scene or to move the plot along. Many scenes are devoid of music entirely to highlight the ominous or overbearing atmosphere. When a character is feeling some kind of emotion, the scene will just kinda let it play out for a while, letting you really absorb the here and now. It's honestly a unique experience, one that not many anime are capable of delivering, and if nothing else, it captures you. Definitely a show that knows what it wants to do, and I'm definitely gonna need to come back to this at some point and actually finish it this time. Oh, and I should probably acknowledge that it has one of the most iconic OPs out there. So yeah, this is a very ads-coded show. S tier. 1996, Detective Conan. Okay, so I've got mixed but mostly positive feelings about this one. Mostly. Detective Conan is a mystery anime about a high schooler named Shinichi who's a deductive genius and often helps the police solve crimes, and he's got a bit of an ego about it. He ends up pissing off a criminal organization who poison him with a mystery chemical. He doesn't die, but instead turns into a young child. He ends up living with his childhood friend taking on the pseudonym Conan, and since he no longer has any detective street cred, he instead subtly helps his friend's detective father solve cases while also investigating the people that kidified him. So the first and most obvious thing I need to get out of the way is that Detective Conan is a very obvious glazing love letter to Sherlock Holmes. Shinichi is a fan of classic mystery literature and name drops Sherlock Holmes numerous times. He'll give these little speeches where he appears clairvoyant, but explains step by step how a bunch of little observations all came together to help him reach a conclusion that's obvious to him but escapes everyone else. If you've ever read a Sherlock Holmes book, Holmes himself does that kind of thing all the fucking time. Hell, even the name Conan that Shinichi ends up taking on is taken from Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, the author of the Sherlock Holmes books. This is not just a reference, he straight up says that's why he picked the name. So looking at the anime from that point of view, there's a lot to appreciate, and you could really tell how much the writers clearly love Sherlock Holmes. The mysteries that Conan solves are wacky, convoluted, and always feature some sort of twist and/or red herring. It's cheesy, but that's kind of the point, though I will acknowledge that they can be a little sloppily written compared to the actual Sherlock Holmes. That being said, once I look a bit deeper than that, I get a little concerned. There are a few things that are set up that I would love to see get some development, and there's a strong core motivator with the story structure that allows for tangents that feel perfectly natural. But there's just something about how these episodes are written that makes me question if the entertaining short-term writing will actually translate into a satisfying long-term story. Conan is desperate to solve the mystery of who attacked him, because he's desperate to find a way to age himself back up. This is both because he wants to solve mysteries and be idolized again, but also because he learns that his childhood friend has feelings for him because she straight up tells him, not realizing that Conan is actually Shinichi. That's a great motivator right there, but there was no continuation to that. It's brought up once, and then the motion kind of ceases. As of the first 3 episodes, Conan doesn't even seem to have developed a plan or strategy to try to seriously dig into the organization that tried to kill him, which feels out of character. Each episode features a central mystery that Conan ends up solving. These are pretty interesting, and it's fun to see how he has to figure out how not just the crimes went down, but how to feed the answer to his new guardian without it sounding suspicious. But they never actually seem to serve a wider purpose. It's basically a sitcom structure with a mystery skin. Entertaining, sure, but I feel like there's not going to be a complete story ever. I don't think the writers are actually planning on an endgame for Conan, because if he was going to solve the core mystery, he probably would have done so on the... let's see, how much airtime has this show had? Ah yes, 1,189 episodes. And counting. Detective Conan is still airing after nearly 30 years, and Conan is still a fucking child. Even considering that half of the episodes appear to be filler, that's still a lot of story for no conclusion. But let me be clear, I was having these kinds of concerns before I knew just how long this series was. I could see that long-term stuff was introduced only to be completely sidelined by the here and now. This is a show that's not written with the purpose of telling a compelling story, it's written to continue in perpetuity. Pacing? There's no pacing, it's a fucking treadmill. And that's kind of a shame, because I think there were some cool things introduced early on that really could have been the foundation for a compelling story. Still, it's entertaining enough with a fun cast of characters, so I'll give it that. B tier. 1997, Berserk. Sort of like Neon Genesis Evangelion, Berserk is a show that's very overt. Even though it does tend to show rather than tell, the ideas it's trying to convey are very obvious. As of episode 3, things are still being set up, so I haven't really gotten into the real meat of the story. But I'm really liking what I'm seeing. In particular, one of the things that I noticed throughout this entire marathon of anime that I watched is that most of the best written shows have a clear purpose for each individual episode. They're not just telling one long story that happens to take a break every 22 minutes, each episode has a special place in the wider story, and the structure is based around the episodic nature of television. Berserk is following a structured story path more clearly than most. The protagonist Guts is a deeply traumatized warrior who is known as the Black Swordsman. He's traversing the world where shit is very clearly fucked, hunting down powerful enemies for reasons that are only hinted at by this point. Episode 1 shows us Guts confronting one of these enemies in brutal fashion. After that, we go back in time to his mercenary days. Episode 2 shows his introduction to an elite mercenary company where, after losing a duel with the leader Griffith, he's forced to join them. He's not happy about this and ends up as a pariah. Episode 3 puts him through a trial by fire where he takes on a critical but dangerous role in a raid where his skills and bravery earn the respect and admiration of the unit. This is all very deliberate, and you can see that each episode serves a purpose to the story. It's not the kind of thing that pops out at you, it's not the anime equivalent of a sports car. It's the anime equivalent of a sedan that looks pretty standard, but you notice that it handles unusually smoothly once you're actually behind the wheel. And based on the 3 episodes I watched, I could probably make a reasonable guess as to how the next chunk of the story will play out, at least as far as the story structure goes, if not the exact details. Based on the cold open of the first episode, followed by a flashback of Guts being slowly built up and ingratiated into a new family of sorts, you know that it's building towards a devastating betrayal. You know by virtue of what you've shown that something happens to turn the already traumatized Guts into a broken man fueled by rage that we saw in episode 1. And this is not so subtly reinforced with the colors. Episode 1 is extremely dark and desaturated. It's actually quite reminiscent of the black and white grittiness of the original manga. But when episodes 2 and 3 portray a, not happy time, but a happier time, the color palette is noticeably brighter. Even scenes that take place in the dead of night are less dark than the first episode. So even if I didn't already know that Griffith was the big bad, I could probably have guessed that he's probably going to shortly engage in a bit of fuckery. And alongside all of this is visceral moments of just how fucked in the head Guts is. In the present, he literally has demons clinging to him and tormenting him. In the past, he has a nightmare about what is implied to be his abusive father who he had killed. We see Guts react strongly whenever anyone touches him, which is, telling to say the least. And we see how he directs his pain into single-minded determination, never backing down or relinquishing an ounce of control unless forced to do so. I don't know if this keeps up throughout the show's entire runtime, and I don't know how things will pan out long-term considering the original mangaka died before the story could be finished, but I was very impressed by Berserk's first 3 episodes, and I think I'm definitely going to have to return once I've read a bit more of the manga. S tier. 1998, Cowboy Bebop. This anime is certainly an interesting one. First things first, I need to acknowledge that it's still very clearly setting things up as of episode 3, and that we haven't even met all the main cast yet. I know that there's a lot of stuff that the story does that I just haven't seen yet, but that's not to say that what I did see doesn't have things to praise. Cowboy Bebop is a sci-fi anime that's styled like an old western. In fact, so much of the aesthetics are western themed that it reaches the point of absurdity. Like, even the bartender is dressed like an old-timey saloon worker. Our protagonist Spike and his partner Jet are bounty hunters who make their living capturing wanted criminals. As of episode 3, it has a villain of the week structure, though I can't say if that's going to stick around as it's clearly using this structure to drip feed the entire ensemble cast one at a time. Episode 1 introduced Spike and Jet. Episode 2 brought in the genetically altered dog Ein, and Episode 3 brought the con artist Faye Valentine into the mix, though she's not actually a part of the group yet. From what I understand, Cowboy Bebop has a lot of character stuff specifically with Spike and Jet, but in the first 3 episodes there are only surface level looks on offer. But the outer layer of each of these characters is inherently entertaining. Spike is the charming rogue archetype, a cocky little shit that you can't help but like. Jet is the big teddy bear, always wearing a smile but also voluntarily taking on a lot of responsibility. Ein is, well, a dog, but he annoys Spike and that's funny. And Faye currently looks to be a bit of a femme fatale. All great for entertainment, but currently lacking the depth that I look for in my anime. But one main takeaway I had about this early stage of Cowboy Bebop is that it's stylish as hell and always strives to be exciting and unique. But the one main takeaway I had about this early stage of Cowboy Bebop is that it's stylish as all hell and always strives to be exciting and unique, though not necessarily through sheer technical prowess. The best example I can give is the action scenes. For starters, the music is not what you'd expect. Instead of some high-intensity track, you typically get something upbeat and jazzy, matching the general Western aesthetics. During the fights themselves, the show plays a lot with perspective and camera angles while also having very inventive choreography. No action sequence is straightforward, and the environment is always taken into consideration when 2 characters are squaring up. So even though Cowboy Bebop's fight scenes aren't ridiculous technical spectacles, they're unlike what I've seen in any other anime on this list. Overall, Cowboy Bebop doesn't have the kind of satisfying writing that I'm looking for just yet, but it delivers on a really entertaining experience while it's still setting everything up. Based on what I'm seeing, I think I've got to give it an A tier. 1999, One Piece. Look, One Piece doesn't really need an introduction because it's iconic. And if it's still going after nearly 1,200 episodes and like 15 movies, there's gotta be something there. And full disclosure, I have watched the first 20 or so episodes well before starting this video, so this is not completely blind. And that experience actually tells me something interesting. One Piece's biggest early strength, in my opinion, is actually going to hurt how it's judged in this video. A little bit. See, I really respect how early One Piece is structured because it's extraordinarily patient. One Piece is a show about a group of ragtag misfits going on an adventure to find the legendary One Piece, which lets you become the Pirate King. This means we've got an ensemble cast. And the way One Piece goes about it is that someone will be introduced and then have a dedicated mini-arc to set up their personality, their motivations, and to allow them to build relationships with the rest of the cast both individually and as a group. Most other series that take a similar approach will add one new person per episode. One Piece actually gives them a real storyline as their introduction with its own small 3-act structure. They take a ton of time before the main cast is all put together before moving the plot forward. That attention to detail results in a rock-solid foundation that really benefits a long-running shonen like this. I don't think I've ever seen another series take this level of care so early on, and I respect the hell out of it. That being said, let's not forget that this video judges anime based on the first 3 episodes. As of episode 3, the Straw Hat Pirates are up to 2 members out of, 10? The first mini-arc starts with an introduction to the protagonist Luffy, who's stretchy and wants to be the Pirate King, and then moves into a conflict against a Navy-run island where the next cast member, Zoro the Bounty Hunter, is currently imprisoned, and goes on until the tyrannical captain is beaten and Zoro joins Luffy. Despite still being in the very early stages of the introduction, there's a lot going on that I found very impressive, or at the very least interesting. Not much of importance happens in the first episode, but a complex web of character dynamics is established fairly quickly. Zoro fits the anti-hero archetype, being brutal but willing to put himself through suffering and risk his life for the innocent people around him. The mini-arc features a dual antagonist structure with Captain Morgan, no not that one, who is extremely competent but excessively cruel and rules the island with an iron fist, taxing the locals heavily. Then there's his son, who's basically a nepo baby. He's a dick, but his cruelty doesn't extend quite as far as his father's. Also, he's much more of a wuss and a failure who's a disappointment to his father. So now we have three forces going against one another, and none of them really get along, and I find that much more interesting than the straightforward conflict they could have had. And on top of that, we see little moments where the Navy men try to minimize the harm they cause. They can't disobey orders, but they deeply sympathize with the locals. This is all really good stuff that keeps the audience constantly on edge. Little moments of kindness and a small amount of background lore very quickly humanize Zoro, all the while we get little snippets of future crewmate Nami. I don't want to spend too long on the details since this video is already looking like it's going to be way longer than part 1, so I'm just going to leave you with this. There's a lot going on here. One Piece is taking its time, yes, but it's not wasting the time it's taking. I know there are filler episodes down the line, but these writers knew what they were doing, and the fact that I'm seriously considering taking the plunge and actually putting in the hundreds of hours it would take to get through it should tell you a lot about what I'm seeing. So far, I'm impressed. A tier. 2000. InuYasha. This is another anime that's technically not a blind watch for me, but only technically. I definitely watched an episode as a kid late at night on Adult Swim once, but I retained literally none of it except for what InuYasha the character looks like, so I doubt it's going to affect my review at all. And I should also clarify that unlike the anime men, I didn't watch this one in Spanish. Sorry, I'm not trying to talk shit, but that one was too easy. InuYasha is interestingly a female-led shonen, which isn't super common nowadays, but especially wasn't in the early 2000s. The protagonist Kagome is a 15-year-old girl who is the reincarnation of a priestess from feudal Japan. She ends up going back in time, she's got a special relic that all the yokai and bad guys want, and she meets the half-yokai InuYasha, who ends up becoming a reluctant ally. The main thrust of the story is that the special gem Kagome has is very powerful and everyone wants it. Because of reasons, it ends up getting shattered with the pieces scattering far and wide. So naturally, Kagome and InuYasha are gonna have to find them. Pretty solid premise, and the setting ensures that there will be a wide variety of enemies moving forward. Speaking of the setting, one thing I liked about the show is that it leans very heavily into Shinto mythology and Japanese folklore, which I am not very familiar with, though as a weeb I should change that at some point. But despite the strong focus on cultural things I don't know well, it was still very easy to follow. I found that I didn't need to understand the nuances to pick up what the show was putting down, and I appreciate that I can see the various yokai and figure out what their deal is very quickly so that I can just enjoy whatever insanity they're about to bring. The animation wasn't anything special, but I did enjoy the action scenes quite a bit. They weren't the focus of the show, but they always featured solid choreography and an opponent with a unique set of strengths and weaknesses, which completely changed the dynamic of each scene. InuYasha is still in the introduction, and there's not a whole lot going on with the characters just yet, though the baseline that's been established can definitely work if it's given the attention it needs. And of course, there are cast members that haven't been introduced yet that could definitely change things. So overall, decent but not great. But it could definitely get better or worse depending on how the writers handle things. B tier. 2001, Hellsing. The last anime was technically not a blind watch, but functionally was one. This anime is the opposite. Technically a blind watch, but kinda not really. I'd never seen Hellsing, but I have watched and thoroughly enjoyed Hellsing Ultimate. Granted, it's been a bunch of years since then, so it's not fresh in my mind, so it shouldn't impact things too much. So first and foremost, I really need to acknowledge that Hellsing is visually stunning. Like, holy shit, the blood red and black contrast so well with the silver of the weapons, the white accents on people's clothing, and the blonde hair of several characters. And then there's solid animation, well-choreographed fight scenes, and dramatic effects that combine with the intense religious-inspired music that serve as an audio-visual punch to the face. But aside from that, I feel like the original Hellsing, or at least the first 3 episodes, are a lot of great ideas with mediocre execution on a writing level. The core premise is that Hellsing is a secret government agency in the UK that hunts vampires. Alucard is a vampire who is working for Hellsing, and Ceres is a cop who Alucard had turned in order to save her life after she was injured during one of his missions. A big focus of the first 3 episodes is Ceres coming to terms with her situation and overcoming her biggest weaknesses. She has a visceral aversion to drinking blood, and she struggles when shit gets real and has trouble actually taking lives, even those of vampires and ghouls. All good stuff conceptually, but just about every little bit of progress from her felt kind of unearned. It's like they wanted to highlight this deep internal struggle surrounding identity and what it means to be human, but not actually show us any of the processing it takes to actually deal with that. It's hard to explain without going into too much detail for this video, but it feels less like watching an emotional journey and more like getting occasional updates about a journey that's happening off-screen. and it really undercuts a lot of the cool emotional moments that would have been great with proper build-up. The scene of her unable to take the shot and kill a vampire contrasting a scene where she actually manages to kill a vampire are two really great moments with tons of potential for storytelling. But we don't ever see her transition from someone who can't take the shot into someone who can. We see a few scenes of her struggling, but not how she resolves it. It's like they took a rough outline of Ceres' character arc and just scripted it as is without filling in the space between major story beats. From what I watched, Hellsing was a lot of fun, but failed to do the legwork necessary to turn great ideas into a great story, and that's a real shame. Oh, and I should mention the conflict between Hellsing and the Vatican, which includes a really awesome fight scene between Alucard and this wild-ass priest who thinks that all vampires, including the good ones, need to die. It's really cool, and actually reminds me of some of the dynamics going on in Warhammer 40k's Inquisition between the Puritans and Radicals. But it was only just introduced at the end of episode 3, so I don't want to go too into it here. But yeah, overall a fun enough time, but very much failing to capitalize on its ludicrous amount of potential. B tier. 2002, Naruto. Naruto is another one of those anime that I've always been aware of even before I became a weeb, though I never really knew anything about it aside from the iconic shadow clones being a thing. As I said earlier in this video, I don't have the greatest opinion of long-running shonen, so I was more or less expecting something reasonably enjoyable but ultimately pretty mid. And that's a pretty accurate description of what I got, but not in the way I was expecting. So the premise of Naruto is that the titular Naruto is a kid training to become a ninja as part of his clan, and for context, the ninjutsu techniques they use are basically a magic system. He's an outcast and a bit of a troublemaker, but not malicious. Even if I didn't already know this before watching, it's glaringly obvious that the long-term goal of the series is for Naruto to become the Hokage, which is basically the clan leader. This title is only granted to the clan's greatest ninja, so it's no joke. Like a bunch of other anime I watched for this video and for part 1, it's still setting things up, and the majority of the cast has only had a basic introduction in episode 3, so obviously things could change for better or worse over time. But the one thing that kinda surprised me is how goofy the show is. I was expecting some degree of comedy here and there, but a lot of the experience was just ambient silliness due to Naruto being kind of a gremlin. In particular, he does this thing called the sexy jutsu, where this child flashbangs people by turning into a naked woman, and when he masters the shadow clone jutsu, he combines the two into the harem jutsu. Now look, I am spiritually 12 years old, so I am more than okay with this type of humor. It just caught me off guard is all. But beyond that, there are some good ideas here for storytelling. Naruto is an outcast because a vicious yokai had been sealed away inside him, and people treat him like he's tainted by it. A lot of the story so far has been exploring his loneliness. I particularly liked episode 2 where he meets the Hokage's grandson, who also feels like an outsider due to the special treatment he gets from people due to his heritage, leading to a bond between the two. But despite good ideas being present, it doesn't feel like there's a real sense of focus in the character work just yet. It could very well just be the shakiness often present in a new series, but that's what I experienced. There's been a lot of enjoyable stuff so far, but nothing that really makes me eager to return to the show, though that could definitely change if the character dynamics of the main cast, which haven't been fully established yet, are done well. And one last thing, this is another series that has audio balancing issues. The music is sometimes just too loud relative to everything else and drowns out the rest of the scene. I've said it before and I'll die on this hill. There is zero excuse for a professionally produced anime to have this problem. And in this case, it's bad enough that I'm knocking Naruto down a full tier because of it. Naruto has some potential, but it lands itself squarely in the C tier. 2003, Fullmetal Alchemist. Okay, so for starters, this is Fullmetal Alchemist, not Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood. Also, I have heard that the show kinda went off the rails when it overtook the source material, but that obviously isn't a factor in the first 3 episodes. So let's get the obvious out of the way first. Fullmetal Alchemist has one of the more unique settings of the anime I watched for this video. There's a hard magic system with a world that's somewhat technologically underdeveloped in the traditional sense, but has magitech that can do some fantastical things. The magic system is alchemy, and it's not super well explained just yet, but the idea is that you can transform things, but there's the law of equivalent exchange, which basically says that you need to sacrifice something of equal value to what you want in return for alchemy to work. Value is implied to mean that you need something of equal mass and roughly equal composition, but it's not super well defined as of yet. Also, alchemy gets kinda fucky when living creatures are involved, and goes really bad every time when humans are involved. That brings us to our protagonists, Edward and Alphonse. They are brothers and gifted alchemists who learned about the human thing the hard way. Edward has an arm and a leg replaced by automail, which are magitech prosthetics, and Alphonse is now literally a walking suit of armor. They're on a mission to find the Philosopher's Stone, which will theoretically allow them to undo the damage they did to themselves. Alright, cool setting, and a solid premise for a long-running shonen. And one thing that immediately struck me is that while there is flashy action and some silliness here and there, Fullmetal Alchemist makes it very clear that the overall story is a serious one, and that it takes its characters seriously. I mean, the first antagonist is literally a cult leader manipulating people for personal gain. And episode 3 is entirely dedicated to explaining the emotional motivations of the brothers, how their alchemical disaster happened, how they witnessed their friend lose her parents only to then lose their own mother not long after, how they came to the reluctant acceptance that there's no bringing her back, but dedicating their lives to the slim possibility that they might be able to restore the bodies they had lost trying to play God. It's all great stuff and it really hooks you in. It gets you to care about these two early on and establishes them as complex and flawed people who've come a long way but still have an even longer way to go. I will give some slight criticism to how heavy-handed the show can be. The aforementioned cult leader was initially portrayed as a benevolent figure, but one look at the guy and I realized it was the most obvious wolf in sheep's clothing character design I've ever seen. Granted, the initial misdirection isn't supposed to last long, but it's so blatant that the illusion was completely broken well before the reveal. Also, the show establishes a lot of little things that ultimately come together to reveal both what's been going on and how they end up overcoming the bad guy. While it didn't make all the details of how things would go obvious, it did draw so much attention to the relevant bits that it becomes obvious that, hey, this thing right here is one of the puzzle pieces. Which in my opinion undermines the moment everything comes together because you're not looking back and saying, oh yeah, that was a thing that happened earlier. You already knew that background detail was part of the answer because they fucking zoomed in on it at the end of a scene. But that's a minor complaint, all things considered. The actual execution was pretty great in my opinion. All in all, I was fully enthralled watching these 3 episodes, and it made me very interested in going back and watching more of not only Fullmetal Alchemist, but also the reboot. Oh, and I should mention that the 7 deadly sins seem to be involved somehow, but that's still shrouded in mystery, so I can't say if this is a good thing or not just yet. But overall, I was very impressed, and I honestly don't think the negatives are enough to drop it down at all. S tier. 2004, Bleach. I'm sure that some of you watching this video have been eagerly awaiting for me to talk about Bleach. It's a very well-known shonen, and a lot of people like it a lot. And I'm sorry to disappoint you, but I don't think there's all that much interesting to say here. To me, Bleach is the perfect example of what frustrates me about modern shonen. If you remember what I said during the section on Yu Hakusho about half an hour ago, many shonen series maintain a baseline of fun factor that makes them enjoyable, but also play things very safe, in such a way that they lock themselves into being good and out of being great. That is what Bleach is. We have our protagonist Ichigo, who's a high schooler with a rough exterior but kind at his core. He meets the Shinigami Rukia, and for story reasons she ends up injured and transfers her power to Ichigo. And the whole point of the show is that until she can fully recover and take her power back, Ichigo needs to do her job of helping souls move on to the afterlife and fighting corrupted souls known as hollows that seek out and eat good souls. Can't really go wrong with that kind of premise, and I'll admit it's pretty cool and the action is well choreographed and well animated. It's a good looking show, but the writing doesn't really do anything to set it apart at all. Granted, we're still in the early stages, and as of episode 3, Ichigo has only just agreed to take on the responsibility, but the emotional ideas it presents are so heavy-handed that it's borderline insulting. The first hollow literally goes on multiple monologues explaining the nuances of the resentment he felt following his death. It's like the writers were brainstorming and coming up with this character and his motivations. They wrote down a description of all the deep emotional things he was dealing with. Then when it came time to start writing the screenplay, they just had him read off everything in his character sheet rather than incorporating it into a character that actually feels like a real person. If this is how we're kicking things off, I don't have a lot of hope for quality writing down the line. And another issue is that I think I caught a pretty significant plot hole. So during a fight with the first hollow, Ichigo recognizes the person he used to be and has this big moment of, oh shit, can I actually kill this person who's as much of a victim as the souls he's hunting? Rukia then tells him that Shinigami strike hollows from behind so they don't learn their identities, presumably because you might end up hesitating if you're too cognizant of the hollow's humanity. Makes sense, right? And it's a solid idea that could be expanded on down the line and spark a lot of emotional conflict that would serve as an excellent starting point for character development. But then later on, when the hollow experiences a brief moment of lucidity and wants to be struck down, Rukia explains that when you slice and dice, you're not killing the hollows but simply cleansing them so they can pass on. So then why the fuck is it such a big deal to not see their identity? Wouldn't it actually motivate you to fight harder since you can see the person you're trying to save? This really feels like a writing fuck up, and if we're already seeing those in the first 3 episodes, particularly about something as big as this, that really does not inspire confidence. But I don't want to end this section on a negative note, so I'll quickly acknowledge that Rukia is a really fun character. She's the exact flavor of little shit that I really enjoy, and I think she alone could keep me interested if I was ever forced to watch Bleach all the way through. So Bleach is just modern shonen exemplified. Writing that's mediocre at best, but with a lot of flashy fun that keeps it engaging. It's good, but miles away from being great. B tier. 2005, Mushishi. This is going to be difficult. I think I'm a pretty intelligent person, and I'd like to think that my time on YouTube has made me a bit more knowledgeable about writing and fiction than the average person. But holy fucking shit, I think I might be in over my head with Mushishi, and it's going to be tough to really put my thoughts into words here. Mushishi is a show that is heavily inspired by Japanese folklore and that type of spirituality. These are things I'm not very familiar with, and it's probably the reason that this section is going to be a struggle to script. The premise is that there are countless creatures in the world known as Mushi, which are essentially the most basic and fundamental forms of life that simply are. They exist to exist, no more, no less, and only some people can actually see them. They sometimes cause things to get a little fucky, and the story follows a man named Ginko who is a Mushishi, an expert on Mushi and someone who can deal with the problems these creatures can cause. Each episode features a new type of Mushi causing a new problem to a new person, and there's always a theme. For example, one Mushi affects the sense of sight, and the episode plays around with the idea of light and darkness and how that changes when a spiritual element gets involved. One Mushi burrows in people's ears and consumes the sound, which can then feed a different Mushi that consumes the silence that is produced. This episode plays around with all the intricacies surrounding the sense of hearing. It's all really fucking eclectic, and I didn't really understand a lot of what was going on at Mushishi's core, but I was absolutely enthralled. Despite me not having that cultural connection, there's a beauty to Mushishi that cuts through everything else, and as strange and varied as the plotlines could be, and as much as the show completely discards conventional logic, I could see a persistent theme of human connection underlying each episode. The ways the Mushi unintentionally mess with things, remember that these creatures aren't evil, they just are, break the connection between people in some way or another. People get isolated, they lose their support systems, but alongside the Mushishi's efforts, it's those connections that do the real healing. Again, I'm kind of out of my depth here, but Mushishi evokes a lot of strong emotions, but they're very nebulous. It's strange, it's hard to really pin down, but it draws you in and the beautiful visuals really enhance that effect. Now, the one thing I can talk about that I found interesting is that the series protagonist Ginko is actually a supporting character if you look at individual episodes. He's the only constant, but the people he helps are the protagonists of their episodes, and we largely see things from their perspective. I think that's really neat, and another nice touch is that something about Ginko changes with each encounter. He takes with him a wine cup that was really important to the plot of episode 1. He gives up his prosthetic eye. He collects the horns that grew on one of the people he helped. Each experience stays with him, and I think that represents that human connection thing from earlier. Even though we don't encounter these characters anymore, those experiences still shaped Ginko in one way or another. Mushishi really fucked with my head in a way that I really haven't experienced before, and there's something special there. I still don't really know if I did this show justice in this section of the video, but I would highly recommend giving this one a shot. It's definitely not going to be for everyone, but if you're anything like me, you'll appreciate this series way more than you think it will. S tier. 2006, Death Note. As I explained in part 1, I did not become a weeb through anime like most people, but through visual novels. Very uncommon, I know. But as a result, I have a lot less experience with anime than people tend to think, meaning I've seen little to nothing from most of the anime I watched for this project. Death Note is the first major exception because I've seen it multiple times and read the manga, so I am familiar with where the story ends up going, and I definitely have a bit of a positive bias here. I mean, I genuinely think the infamous potato chip scene is actually an amazing piece of character work. Fight me. But for all one of you in the audience who aren't familiar, hi again, Dad. The premise of Death Note is that the overachieving high schooler Light Yagami found the titular Death Note journal that had been dropped by the Shinigami Ryuk. If you write someone's name in the book while picturing their face in your mind, fuck you if you have aphantasia I guess, that person will die. Light does the reasonable thing, and almost as soon as he realizes the thing is real, he makes it his mission to rid the world of evil one name at a time, and the public gives him the nickname Kira. This catches the attention of the savant detective who goes by the pseudonym L, leading to an extended battle of wits. So to get the obvious out of the way, Death Note is extraordinarily melodramatic. In fact, I don't think I could name another piece of media that's this chuny, takes itself seriously, and has it work. Even just the first 3 episodes get pretty edgy pretty quickly, without it being a turnoff. Even when I first watched it, before I would have considered myself a weeb, and therefore before I got accustomed to anime bullshit, it drew me in rather than pushing me away. And I think the reason boils down to 2 connected factors. The first is Light himself. When you strip everything away, Death Note is a story of hubris. Light has a massive but arguably earned ego that only grows as the story progresses, and the power of the Death Note turns him into a full-on megalomaniac. This ego of his gives him the confidence to execute difficult or risky plans without hesitation, but can also cause him to overstep and make small mistakes that L can capitalize on, with a classic example of how Light took the bait of a decoy L which narrowed his location down to the Kanto region of Japan. Point being that Light's psychology is over the top. He's a grandiose person doing grandiose things, and he literally wants to be seen as a god ushering in a golden age of humanity. It kinda fits that the framing of the show would echo that sentiment. And that leads me to the second factor. Death Note really doesn't waste any time. With how dramatic it tends to be, it wouldn't be surprising to see a lot of bluster and self-indulgent spectacle. But in the first 3 episodes alone, we get a huge chunk of all the important notes that are going to play a major role in the story to come. We have Light explicitly stating his endgame. L is established as a worthy opponent and currently the only real threat to Light's power. We've got the fact that Light's father is a police chief. We've got hints of the philosophical and moral questions surrounding a serial killer who only targets evildoers. We're introduced to the Shinigami Eyes, which serve as a will he or won't he plot device. Death Note's edginess works because from the very beginning it's clear that it has a purpose. It's not edgy just for the sake of being cool, it's the backdrop to a real story that has real care put into it. And that's not even going into the excellent lighting, beautiful use of color, and heavy religious symbolism in both the visuals and the iconic intense soundtrack, that I won't be showing here for copyright reasons. Which is a shame. I'd have liked to actually demonstrate how all this stuff comes together, because you really do have to see it to get it. But in any case, Death Note is an extremely popular anime, and it's that way for a very good reason. For all the surface level silliness, it's a solid story with a great introduction, and I think it more than deserves its reputation. S tier. 2007, Gurren Lagann. We've got another mecha anime, but unlike Neon Genesis Evangelion, Gurren Lagann in many ways feels like a loving homage to the shows that came out around the time of the mecha boom, while still taking its own unique approach to the concept. It's a combination mecha show, kind of. Core premise is that we have dual protagonists Simon and Kamina. They are complete foils of one another, with Simon being insecure and scared, and Kamina being boisterous and overconfident. They live in an underground city in a post-apocalyptic setting, they find a mech suit that Kamina names Lagann, and eventually make their way to the surface after a big animalistic mech suit busts through the ceiling hatch and attacks the city. From there, they learn that there are these sentient animal things in mech suits fighting other humans on the surface. Kamina eventually captures a mech suit and names it Gurren. When he jams Lagann into the top of Gurren, they become Gurren Lagann. So it's an homage to the old school combination mecha anime, but a little silly since Kamina just fucking stabs Lagann into the roof of his mech suit. But while there are definitely notes of earlier mecha anime, it doesn't do the typical alien invasion type of story, but instead has all the conflict take place on Earth with the current inhabitants of Earth. There are some flashy fight scenes, character designs are great, and there is a lot of small instances of humor that I found very charming. The thing is, like many of the other shows I've covered in both this video and part 1, we've basically just started the story, and at the end of episode 3, the main cast has just set out on their major journey. What I'm seeing so far is interesting characters, a solid core premise, and a few hints of deeper emotional things that could potentially lead to some great storytelling. But I have no idea if it'll actually manage to execute on this solid foundation or not. Honestly, it could go either way at this point. I just don't have enough to really work with yet, but I am liking what I'm seeing. I enjoyed the first 3 episodes, and at the very least, they left me curious as to how the rest of the show pans out. A tier. 2008, Toradora. Toradora is a slice-of-life rom-com, but not in the way you'd expect. Our protagonists are Ryuji, who has a scary face but is actually nice, and Taiga, who looks adorable but has a crazy temper. But here's the thing, this story doesn't seem to be heading in the direction of getting them together. Rather, each is actually interested in the other's golden retriever best friend, and they end up forming a bond as they mutually try to wingman for each other. I think that's a cool way to approach an otherwise oversaturated genre of anime, and believe it or not, Toradora made me rethink something about myself. Call me a fake weeb if you want, but I've never liked tsunderes. There have been rare exceptions here and there, but it's just not an archetype that appeals to me. I'm just not gonna like the character whose defining personality trait is bitch. But Toradora does something a bit different with that core concept by making Taiga a platonic tsundere. She's got that, it's not like I like you or anything, baka, energy, but with no romantic feelings behind it, and I kinda love it. So what you get is a bit of contrast. There's her normal aggression and condescension that contrasts with moments of vulnerability when she needs help with her romantic endeavors, or when she confides in Ryuji because she knows he won't judge her. And then they'll have more lighthearted moments where they'll start sharing the same brain cell and do some stupid plan that ends up being both funny and a nice showcase of their growing bond. And on top of that, the show is well animated and funny. It's often over the top for comedic effect, but pulls it back just before it breaks immersion. Toradora gave me a really cozy feeling when I was watching it. It has the cute, low-stakes antics that you'd expect from a comedic slice of life, with a strong foundation of good characters and little moments that really solidify what everyone is going through. Seeing an episode close off with Taiga doing her tsundere thing before smiling and being happy that Ryuji called her by her first name, indicating that he views her as a friend. I'm not really doing it justice in this video, but everything in Toradora just blends together perfectly. And when I eventually go back to this anime, I'm sure I can expect the fluffiness that I like from moe stuff and great character work as well. I'm thoroughly impressed. S tier. 2009, Fairy Tail. How can I best describe Fairy Tail? It's basically the perfect example of what normies think anime is. Overpowered fight scenes? Check. Weird-ass talking animal companion? Check. Plucky female deuteragonist who tends to overreact to things? Check. Horny? Actually, not as much as you'd think, but check. And on top of that, there's just this persistent infusion of anime bullshit. My experience with the first 3 episodes of Fairy Tail was one of pure condensed insanity. Lots of spectacle, outrageous characters, stupid humor, which as we established by now is right up my alley, and at least one sexual predator per episode. But beyond that, there's not much going on. The premise of the show is that magic is a thing and some elements of magic can be bought and sold. If you're good at magic, you're a wizard, Harry. If you're a wizard, you join a guild, which is how you gain money and fame. Lucy is a wizard specializing in summoning. Her main goal is to collect as many summoning spells as possible, but she also wants to get into the most prestigious guild known as Fairy Tail, which she does very early on. Natsu is a member of Fairy Tail who is seeking out the dragon who originally mentored him before disappearing. He's accompanied by Happy, who's a talking cat. As of episode 3, there's really nothing happening underneath the hood. We've got baseline character traits and basic motivations, but nothing I can really sink my teeth into. Aside from the introduction of Lucy to Natsu and Happy and her introduction into Fairy Tail, there hasn't really been any movement in the plot, and instead we get an isolated adventure in episode 2, and a cliffhanger to what appears to be another isolated adventure in episode 3. So while the fight scenes are good, the characters have an entertaining surface level, and the jokes are funny, there just isn't anything that satisfies me as someone who likes good writing. Objectively speaking, the fun factor probably props Fairy Tail up in the B tier, but I also learned that this anime is the origin of that one wow sound effect, which I have an irrational hatred of. So Fairy Tail is going into the C tier. Fuck you, it's my tier list. 2010, Angel Beats. This anime is different. It kinda feels like an eclectic passion project, but with a real budget. It's also noteworthy for being one of the few anime to be adapted into a visual novel. Usually it's the other way around. I have quite a bit to say about Angel Beats, and it's going to be tough without spoilers. The premise is that our protagonist Otonashi is a high schooler who woke up on an unfamiliar campus with no memories. Turns out, he's dead and this is the afterlife. He joins up with a group of students who refuse to accept the status quo and fight against the closest thing there is to an authority figure, Tenchi, the so-called angel who's basically the Terminator if he was a supernatural anime girl. I promise that if you haven't seen this show, that description is more accurate than it sounds like it should be. There are also a bunch of students who don't seem to actually be real and are literally referred to as NPCs. The difficulty in this fight is that the win condition is not clear, and also death is not failure. In fact, Otonashi dies 3 times in the first episode. You just wake up a little while later. Which brings me to something I just have to rant about. So while I was watching the anime for both this video and part 1, a lot of it was on stream. One of the things that became a bit of a meme is that I would make fun of how bad the gun safety was in most anime. I'm American, this is something I notice. Angel Beats is actually way better than most in that regard. One of the things you're supposed to do when holding a gun is to keep your pointer finger resting along the side of the weapon instead of right on the trigger to prevent accidentally shooting when you don't mean to. Angel Beats has the characters actually do this. Why does this annoy me? Because the one anime that actually has decent-ish gun safety is the one anime where it doesn't fucking matter. In this story, death is a minor inconvenience. It's not really an issue if you accidentally shoot someone or yourself because you can basically just take a nap about it. Okay, tangent over. I've been sitting on that one since I started scripting part 1. Back to the premise, death isn't failure. Instead, you can face obliteration. When someone stops fighting and accepts their situation, they disappear. Do they move on? Are they gone? Nobody knows, but they don't want to test it and they don't want to give up on their chance to take control of their new existence. So with such a wild concept for the plot and a built-in excuse to go over the top with the lethality, this is probably a bombastic action show that thrives on spectacle, right? Well, kinda, but not really. There is a lot of action, and there are plenty of moments that are deliberately a little gratuitous for comedic effect, since again, horrifying deaths are minor inconveniences. But at its core, Angel Beats is a serious character-focused story about a bunch of kids, really, who are all dealing with just a pinch of debilitating emotional trauma. To put it simply, every single person Otonashi meets really went through it when they were alive, and a big part of the story is how they all deal with that trauma, and how they now have the chance to lash out at an avatar that represents to them the universe that fucked them over. And it's really fucking good. In fact, while I wouldn't say that this was my absolute favorite anime of the list, that one's coming a bit later, I do think that episode 3 of Angel Beats is the single best episode out of the 190 I watched for this whole project. I tried several times to script out an explanation of what this show manages to accomplish in that single episode, but I just couldn't really do it without spoilers. But the abbreviated version is that it examines one of the characters' relationship with music and how she finds purpose and meaning beyond just the escapism she sought to cope with the struggles of growing up in an abusive household. And you learn how that escapism was ripped away from her before she died. Learning her story recontextualizes a previous musical segment, and when you hear her perform again, different song but same kind of feel, it hits differently, because you're not just hearing a rock song and seeing a plot device in action, you can see in her face what this means to her. And they have this other important thematic thing with a ballad she composed that is how the episode opens. It's rejected by the group not because it's bad, but because it's not as useful as a distraction. But then, towards the end of the episode, things happen, and when things are looking pretty bad for her emotionally, she performs that song, notably as a solo, without her bandmates contributing. Without context, it's hard to understand, but it's a hard-hitting moment, and I'm not gonna pretend I didn't feel some things. And this moment comes with a realization from the character, followed by a beautiful and sad moment accented by the ballad that's both amazing from a character perspective, but also adds questions about how this world works. But beyond just the really great emotional moments this episode has, I need to hammer home the fact that this episode contained a full character arc that was done really well, in the course of like 20 minutes, while there was also other stuff happening in the episode. That's not fucking easy to do, and most writers don't have the skill to pack so much into so little runtime and make it feel natural. I'm genuinely blown away by what I saw here. Is there any question where this is going on the tier list? S tier. Easy S tier. 2011, Hunter x Hunter. This is another shonen anime that's still very much only ankle deep into its introductory phase as of episode 3, so my criticisms of the show may not hold up long term. The whole point is that the main character wants to be a hunter, which is basically someone who takes tasks to hunt monsters and criminals and such, and there are a number of trials prospective hunters need to overcome in order to actually join up. Well, we're still doing those trials, so Hunter x Hunter has not yet made the hunter a hunter. Our protagonist is Gon, a plucky kid from a rural village who wants to follow in his father's footsteps, and he joins up with Kurapika, who wants revenge against the bandits who massacred his clan, and Leorio, who's in it for the money. Plot-wise, that's all you really need to know for the purposes of this video. Now, there are things to like about this anime. The characters are interesting, both visually and personality-wise. The action is inventive, and there's almost always some kind of twist to keep you on your toes. World building is still underdeveloped, but exciting. And I think the voice acting is pretty good all things considered. But there's very little of substance for me to latch onto at this point. Again, it's still not even really at square one as far as the wider story goes, but when I'm marathoning over 60 different anime, that just doesn't do it for me. Not to mention how annoying that kind of thing is to review properly. The baseline we get is interesting, but it can still kinda go either way. The one thing I will say is that I really don't care for the protagonist Gon so far. It's not that he's not a likable character, it's that he's too likable. This is not an uncommon thing in a lot of shonen, but our protagonist doesn't really have any flaws to speak of except maybe a bit of naivete. To me, that begs the question of what the fuck his character arc is supposed to accomplish. He's an idealistic good boy who's extraordinarily competent by nature and always follows his heart and sees the best in people. Where's he really supposed to go from there? Maybe things will come up later on, but I actually greatly prefer the other two members of his makeshift party because they have flaws that are front and center. But you can see how they have their moments of being good people at their core whenever that outer layer breaks down for a bit. And they also end up being foils of one another, so they play off each other quite nicely. Honestly, I don't have a whole lot to really say beyond what I already have. There's stuff there and it's entertaining so far, but it's another example of my issues with shonen. As of episode 3, it's basically the empty calories of anime. B tier. 2012 Sword Art Online. Want a little bit of ads lore? As I've said in the past, I didn't become a weeb until I was already in my 20s. I was just completely removed from anime, and none of my friends growing up were really all that into it, and the only anime I had ever really watched was Pokemon, which doesn't count since I grew up during Pokemania. However, I had nothing against anime per se, I was more than willing to give it a fair chance. And my first ever anime that I went out of my way to watch was Sword Art Online. And it's a fucking miracle that I still somehow ended up a weeb, because even back then, before I was half as knowledgeable about all this writing shit as I am now, I could see so many problems with this anime, and I ended up watching way too much of it solely because the premise was interesting enough that I desperately wanted it to be good. That premise is pretty simple. A new fantasy MMO is released that is fully immersive virtual reality. When you play, it's like you're actually inside the game. A bunch of people jump on the game at launch, and later on, the creator of the game disables the logout function and informs everyone that the game is now IRL permadeath. You die in the game, you die in real life. You can only leave by beating the game. Our protagonist is Kirito, a very chuny teenager who beta tested the game and is pretty good at it, and now everyone's goal is to clear the game so as to not die. Solid core premise, and again, that alone made me watch a lot of this show. I bet you can probably take a guess at what my overall opinion on Sword Art Online is just from how I'm framing it, but it's not all bad. The visuals are pretty solid, the fight scenes, even though they don't make a whole lot of sense from the perspective of this being an MMO, are exciting and entertaining. The spectacle of the show isn't bad, and I think the first episode is actually pretty good and it sets up the core conflict really effectively in my opinion. In fact, if you're looking for a bombastic, turn your brain off kind of show, you could do worse than Sword Art Online. But if you dedicate even a sliver of your focus to the writing, you're gonna end up craving that IRL permadeath. As of episode 3, there's not really a whole lot of character stuff going on beyond baseline things. Kirito is the only character who's gotten any real focus so far, and his main struggle so far is being an outsider who continually deals with survivor's guilt as he sees people he cares for or respects die. Not a terrible start, but given the lightning fast pace of the story, things should have started moving forward a bit by now. I mean, they're already halfway through the game at this point, which also doesn't make a whole lot of sense in an MMO setting since those aren't linear experiences with a defined endpoint, but if I complained about the issues with this thing as a game, we'd be here all day. Seriously, there's a lot. And speaking of pacing, Sword Art Online takes that shit as a suggestion. True story, when I first watched this anime and put on episode 2, I legitimately thought I'd accidentally skipped an episode. Episode 1 ends almost immediately after the creator of the game does his dramatic announcement, leaving a question in the viewer's mind. How are things going to progress, and how are people going to react to this heart-stopping news? Well, we don't get to see any of that, because episode 2 starts off with a month-long time skip where everyone has already kind of adjusted and the status quo has been established. I personally would have loved to see that initial chaos, and it would have set up an amazing baseline for us to understand how the social dynamic of the community of players trapped in the game functions. And then episode 3 tries to speedrun through emotional stuff that simply can't be done in the time they allotted. The whole point of the episode was to amplify Kirito's existing feelings of survivor's guilt by having him join a small guild, only for them to eventually party wipe with Kirito as the only survivor. But they introduced and killed off these characters in the span of like 12 minutes. They tried to establish one of them as someone Kirito felt extremely protective of, only to lose her and later receive a posthumous goodbye and thank you message. As a moment in a vacuum, the ending where he's finally able to grieve for his friend is fantastic. In context, we the audience haven't had a real chance to bond with even the main object of Kirito's guilt, much less the rest of the guild. So this emotional moment just doesn't hit us the way it was intended to. And that's the experience of Sword Art Online. Even if I didn't already know going in that no, it doesn't get better, I would be very pessimistic. If things are falling apart on a structural level this early on into an anime, it's unlikely that it's going to fix itself long term. Look, I get that there are a lot of people who like this anime, and I'm not going to act like it can't be fun, but if you think it's good, you're fucking delusional. If it weren't for the good visuals and action, I'd be putting SAO in D tier, but I think that it just barely crawls its way into the low C tier. I really wish this thing ended up being better. There's real potential here that just did not get realized. 2013, Attack on Titan. Going into this project, I was very excited to watch Attack on Titan. Not because of the fact that it's a popular anime that I've heard mostly good things about, but because of its origins. I already told you how I got into weebery through visual novels, right? Well, my favorite visual novel series is Muv-Luv, a true masterpiece that I think every one of you should read. Don't watch the anime adaptation though. And the thing about Attack on Titan is that the creator has confirmed that Muv-Luv was a major inspiration. So naturally, I was quite excited. And while it doesn't quite check all the boxes for what I love about Muv-Luv as of episode 3, there's more than enough there to leave me very intrigued. The premise of Attack on Titan is that we're in a world where the entirety of humanity lives in fortress cities with several layers of massive walls. These walls keep out the titular Titans, which are really big humanoid monsters with most of them being 50 feet tall or so as an estimate, but with some that are several times bigger. These things eat people, and it's generally acknowledged that going outside the cities comes with a high likelihood of death. And while there are a few mechanical inventions that are pretty impressive, like harnesses that use grappling hooks and zip lines to give you verticality, the setting is for the most part purely medieval. It's implied that a lot of the technology and scientific knowledge was lost when the Titans showed up and took over the world. We follow our protagonist Eren and his sister Mikasa, who live in one of the cities. As you might have guessed, Titans do Titan things, which ends up kicking off the plot. There are a lot of things I could talk about, ideas that are beginning to be explored even being only 3 episodes in. But there's one thing in particular that stands out. If there was one word I could use to describe Attack on Titan, it would be visceral. This anime is a story that leans very heavily into trauma and the horrors of war. At times it feels like the entire art direction is specifically designed to make you uncomfortable, to drive home just how fucked up everything and everyone is. The Titans have these unsettling facial expressions. Blood and gore have this morbidly artistic depiction in the animation. For instance, at the end of episode 1, someone gets eaten and there's this shot of just the blood against a cloudy sky, and the slow motion effects make it kind of look like flower petals in the wind. And in my opinion, the thing that ties it all together is the faces. The way the characters are drawn is unlike most other anime, stylistically speaking. And it becomes so clear why Attack on Titan looks the way it does when someone is dealt a heavy emotional blow. The wrinkles and lines are prominent in the faces, the eyes are sunken in with the brows casting shadows, surrounded by worry lines drawing attention to those eyes. They're wide open and actually vibrate. The background sometimes fades into just textures, leaving only the character, which is extra prominent since the borders around the characters are thicker than most anime. And the expressions rarely change in these moments. While other anime would use that purely as a cost-cutting measure, in this particular context, it emphasizes the shock these people are feeling as they try and fail to process the wave of emotions they're experiencing. And it's all enhanced by the noticeably high-quality lighting. Like seriously, you could tell it was a focus for the animators. I'll have been showing you clips from the show throughout this section of the video, and you'll probably have a decent idea of what I'm trying to say. But to get the full impact, you really do need to see it in context. And then of course there's the story. Given that it's inspired by Muv-Luv, I know there's going to be a lot of concepts explored that need way more than 3 episodes to properly set up. But I can already see some good stuff right at the start, even considering that the plot has mostly just been a get us to square one kind of deal. In particular, I'm really liking the dynamic between Eren and Mikasa. Eren processes his trauma by channeling it into single-minded rage, with the goal of getting revenge on the Titans, and he already had quite a bit of resentment for them even before the severe PTSD. Mikasa considers it her duty to protect Eren without coddling him, so she joins him on his journey to join the military and sometimes even protects Eren from his own trauma-induced recklessness. It's still very early, but there's a lot of ways they could explore this, and I'm definitely eager to watch the rest of this anime. As far as the ranking goes, I'm having a bit of trouble nailing this one down, because I feel like a lot of the show's strengths are likely to show itself in the long term and not the short term. But that of course depends entirely on execution. I liked what I saw, but while there is so much potential on offer, it hasn't really reached its final form just yet. That being said, I'm going to give it an S tier, but it's right on the border at the moment. If it actually executes on all the things I'm noticing, easy, solid S. If it doesn't, it'll probably still land itself in the A tier. But for now, tentative S tier. 2014, Tokyo Ghoul. Tokyo Ghoul is a modern shonen. So should I just give it a B tier like the rest of them and move on? Nah, if you made it this far, you clearly like listening to me yap, and who am I to deny you your fix? I'll just quickly say that I'm aware of the whole Season 2 debacle with this show, but obviously that won't factor into this video. Tokyo Ghoul has a really interesting premise. Basically, within society there are monsters known as ghouls. At a glance, they're identical to humans, but they have some level of superpower, though it's not super clear how that all works at this point. Oh, and they eat people. Our protagonist Ken has a run-in with one of these ghouls, but for reasons I'm not getting into here, he survives but is badly injured. He ends up getting an organ transplant, no they don't specify which organ or organs got transplanted, and the donor ends up being the ghoul that almost killed him. So now he's half human, half ghoul, though he kinda functions exactly like a ghoul from what I can see, aside from only one of his eyes turning red. From there, the story so far is about Ken coming to grips with his newfound ghoulishness, particularly his need to eat human flesh to survive, and also the underground political struggles that the ghouls are involved in. See, there are the regular ghouls who view humans as livestock and enjoy what they are. There's kind of a semi-feudal structure that hasn't been fully explained. There are also ghouls who would rather live peacefully and source their food more ethically, only taking the bodies of people who had died by other means. This is a fairly small group, basically an informal faction in the wider ghoul structure. And then there's a government agency specifically tasked with combating ghouls. They're framed as bad guys, but like, they're being objectively reasonable considering ghouls fucking eat people. In any case, as of episode 3, the show is still in its introductory phase. Take a drink every time I've said that. Actually, don't. You'll die. But like many other anime in this video, there's only so much I can latch onto at this point, especially since most of it is just Ken freaking the fuck out. And they really do go hard on that aspect of things. So much attention is given to Ken's psyche that it practically drowns out everything else. I actually do like how they'll use these dramatic animations, striking colors, and frenetic voice acting to show Ken simultaneously losing his mind while also being consumed by bloodlust. And he actually kinda does the Attack on Titan trauma face too, which definitely works in this context. Another thing I was kinda surprised by is that there's a lot less action than I was expecting. Of course, there is violence, blood, and gore, but it's used pretty sparingly all things considered. The violence tends to be sudden and intense, but brief, which I think makes it hit a lot harder than if we were just completely inundated with fight scenes. But overall, I'm liking some of what I'm seeing, and the story has some potential, but hasn't really given me a whole lot to work with beyond Ken's internal struggles. So it could go either way. In the end, it's a modern shonen. B tier. 2015, One Punch Man. This is another anime that wasn't a blind watch for me. I watched the first season a few years back and enjoyed it. Like before, I'll do my best to not let it affect this video. One Punch Man has a very unique premise, and one that's actually very clever. It's a soft parody of the Western comic book superhero genre, with the protagonist Saitama drawing some very obvious inspiration from Superman. In a world of superheroes, supervillains, and all manner of beings with both the means and desire to destroy the world, Saitama is overpowered. Like, absurdly so. Arguably more overpowered than Superman, who himself needs his stories to go out of their way to explain why anything is actually a threat to him because he's so overpowered. The name One Punch Man refers to the fact that ever since he obtained his current level of power, Saitama has beaten every opponent he's gone up against with a single punch. So how do you structure a superhero story around a protagonist who breaks the entire power scaling? You approach it from a different angle. Traditional superhero media works on a pretty straightforward structure of hero versus villain, good versus evil. One Punch Man's primary conflict is not one of Saitama going up against an antagonist. Instead, Saitama is starting to get depressed because he has nothing to challenge him. He no longer feels any excitement from fighting because there's no danger and no effort needed beyond a single punch. One Punch Man presents itself as a flashy, campy superhero show. There are crazy monsters, flashy fights, wacky character designs. A side character who specifically fits the role of the protagonist of a darker superhero story, tragic backstory and all. There are silly moments where the various villains will give their monologue only for Saitama to completely kill the vibe before blowing them apart with a single punch. Saitama famously attributes his power to a fairly standard athletic exercise regimen. It's a very silly show that on the surface feels purely like a loving parody of comic book superheroes. It baits you in with the silliness and the spectacle, but before you realize it, you end up actually caring for these characters. Beneath the funny surface, there's actual stuff there that makes you want to know how things turn out for them. It's actually a very ambitious way to tackle a story. Is it perfect? I wouldn't say that. It arguably tries to tackle too much for the amount of runtime it has, leaving some of the characters kind of underbaked. The plot does move a little more slowly than I'd personally like, and the lack of a clear plot direction can make the show feel a bit aimless at times. But this is still a good show, and one that I'd absolutely recommend. A tier. 2016, My Hero Academia. My Hero Academia is a modern shonen with a plucky good boy protagonist. Okay, look, it's not like I don't like these shows at all, it's just that I'm a little fatigued by them at this point. And I feel like all my criticisms of shonen in general apply at least to the first 3 episodes of My Hero Academia. The show is fine, and granted it's still in the middle of setting things up, but it just doesn't do anything to set itself apart in my eyes. The premise is that humanity has become superpowered. Over time, a greater and greater portion of the population has developed powers known as quirks. Since powers have become so prevalent with the majority of people having a quirk, society has shifted so that superheroism has become a full-on industry you can build a career on, and there are now educational facilities specifically designed to help students learn to control and utilize their quirks. Ever seen Sky High? It's kinda like that. Our protagonist Izuku, also called Deku, is a kid who wants nothing more than to be a hero, but is one of the now minority of people who never developed a quirk. Ever seen Sky High? It's kinda like that. Okay, that one is a little bit of a stretch. In any case, My Hero Academia has strong comic book aesthetics, and there's actually a very simple in-universe explanation for this. Comic books existed before quirks, so when people got quirks, they embraced the chance to live out their childhood fantasies, and it stuck. So the actual plot is that Deku's childhood hero is a superhero called All Might. However, the twist is that he was severely injured years back and is only able to look and act like a hero for a few hours a day, and is for all intents and purposes emaciated and quirkless the rest of the time. He strains himself to do his hero work and hide his disability because he knows he's a symbol for righteousness and it could cause problems if people knew he was so hurt. After a chance encounter, Deku meets him and discovers his secret. Shortly thereafter, Deku instinctively charges into danger and impresses All Might with his character, who offers to train him up and eventually pass on his powers, which is something that he specifically is secretly able to do. As of episode 3, we just got past that training arc and into the big superhero school. We haven't met most of the main cast, and we haven't gotten to the meat of the story, so of course what I'm about to say could very well change over time. My Hero Academia has what I consider to be a very impressive coat of paint. The action scenes are fun and generally good in their animation and choreography. Visually, I love the character designs and the overall artistic quality. In particular, I really like how All Might's hero form is actually shaded differently to everyone else, both as a reference to traditional comic book and manga art styles, but also as a subtle indicator that he's altering his appearance deliberately. The core premise of the show is interesting, and I like how the show is examining some of the societal implications of heroism being a thing, with some heroes deliberately putting on a show for the media because name recognition is how you succeed. But the thing is, without a full cast of characters, we're pretty much left with Deku. He's a likable character, but he's just not a compelling character at this point. This goes back to what I've been talking about for ages now. It's very hard to make a perfect person a good character. Without flaws, how do you grow? So far, Deku's only real downside is his lack of a natural quirk, which isn't actually his fault and is resolved fairly early on. So that begs the question of what does he actually have to work towards over the next 170-ish episodes? Things absolutely could crop up down the line, and once the main cast actually comes together, the dynamics will change. But I can't judge a show based on things that might happen. What I'm actually left with in the first 3 episodes is a show that's fun and has a lot of technical competence, but really does not scratch that storytelling itch. I could see myself watching a few episodes of this show here and there, and even really getting into it if the writing starts to really come to fruition, but as is, I'm left with a show that's just fine. B tier. 2017, Black Clover. Black Clover is another modern shonen in a fantasy setting, but it does things a little differently from the titles I've covered up to this point. Rather than a single plucky or edgy protagonist, we have dual protagonists. Asta and Yuno are orphans who may or may not be related. No one really knows. But were raised together as brothers. They are foils of one another to an almost absurd degree. Yuno is quiet, respected, calculated, and a magical prodigy. Asta is reckless, emotional, seen as a bit of a gremlin, and can't use magic at all, which is practically unheard of in this setting. The big goal of this shonen is to become the Wizard King, which is a merit-based role that commands the second most power of any individual behind the actual king himself. The plot kicks off when the two turn 15, which means they get magical grimoires. Yuno gets one with a 4-leaf clover emblem, which is exceptionally rare and powerful. Asta initially gets nothing, which is even more rare. But when he's almost killed by a rogue mage, he's granted a grimoire with a 5-leaf clover, the titular Black Clover. So this show has basically just finished the prologue as of episode 3. Like, that episode ends with them setting off on their journey. So there's a lot I can't really comment on. But what I saw shows some potential on a stylistic level. Like, they built a foundation where they could basically turn Black Clover into juxtaposition the anime, and it would absolutely work. And this goes back to what I said earlier. Asta and Yuno are total foils of one another, opposites in almost every way. Aside from their personalities and appearance, there's a really interesting dynamic going on with their abilities. Yuno is gifted at magic, and his grimoire is golden and enhances abilities in the traditional sense, and he focuses on improving his mastery of magic. Asta, being unable to cast regular magic, has instead focused on training his body, and his grimoire is not only dark and evil looking, the opposite of Yuno's, but the magic is much more physical. The only thing we see him do with it is conjure a huge sword that can nullify magic. And even afterwards, Asta is still incapable of using regular magic. If they don't play around with this and really explore how these two approach obstacles from completely different angles, that would be genuinely shocking, because it kinda seems like that's going to be the central thing moving forward. So that's pretty much the entirety of what's keeping me optimistic. There just isn't really all that much else I can see being set up just yet from a more character or thematic perspective. Most of the show so far has just been getting us to square one. Aside from that, the visuals are pretty nice, and the setting is pretty interesting as far as fantasy worlds go. The one thing that really puts me off at this point is that Asta is a bit of an acquired taste, and he still annoys the fuck out of me. I think it's the whiny way his VA delivers certain lines. Great voice acting, but it makes me want to go into a homicidal rage. So overall, there's stuff there and I'm intrigued, but it could go either way in the long term. B tier, but with the potential to be an easy A tier down the line. 2018, Violet Evergarden. This is another one of those anime where you can tell there's something special there. For starters, it's abundantly clear that they went all in on the visuals because it's absolutely stunning and has noticeably high quality lighting, and the animation is butter smooth. Is butter smooth? No, it's slippery. That's a different texture altogether. Someone needs to answer for this. Anyway, Violet Evergarden is set in a fictional world that's similar to the early 1900s in terms of aesthetics and technology, though there are a few instances of retrofuturistic inventions with highly intricate mechanical processes. It's kinda similar to Attack on Titan's harnesses in the sense that there's no modern machinery or power source, but is still well beyond the expected capabilities of the setting. The story follows the titular Violet, a child soldier who is now either a young adult or really close to it. She'd been severely injured in combat, missed the end of the war that was being fought, and was given the in-universe equivalent of an honorable discharge. So now there are a couple of different but interconnected difficulties she must now face. For starters, she has only ever known war and so has extreme difficulty in adjusting to civilian life. Secondly, she is incredibly emotionally stunted because she was basically an emotional blank slate in her youth, and was never given the chance to properly develop. And even when she was assigned to a commander who actually gave a shit, it still wasn't conducive to healthy emotional growth. Plus, there's the fact that she almost certainly has severe PTSD due to the years of killing and death capped off with her getting her arms blown off, she gets prosthetics, and nearly dying. And lastly, she's experiencing a bit of internal turmoil because of some confusion surrounding her major. He was basically the only person to treat her like an actual human, and she'd been by his side for years. He was killed in action, but because Violet doesn't know that at the start, she just kind of feels abandoned and lacking guidance while kind of grieving, but not fully grieving. Now here's the thing about stories in general, particularly character-focused stories that don't really have a big external plot thing pushing the story forward. There's usually a core idea they try to explore. There are stories about overcoming self-doubt, moving on from a heartbreak, growing up. Violet Evergarden's core idea is a simple yet profound question, one that's explicitly asked by Violet multiple times. What does "I love you" mean? Those were the last words her major said to her before he died, and she is so far removed from the normal human experience that she can't understand, even on a purely logical level, what he was trying to communicate with those words. So that becomes her purpose. She sees a professional typist, known as an auto-memory doll, ghostwriting a letter for a man who ends it with, "I love you." She immediately decides that becoming an auto-memory doll herself is how she will learn what that phrase actually means. As you might expect, this is not initially a very good fit, but through this job and through meeting a bunch of people going through their own struggles, she slowly starts to understand people and become more than just a tool of war. It's actually kind of hard for me to really go into specifics about why I think this show is as effective as it is, because everything about it kind of flows together. The show is essentially one long look at Violet's new life. Seeing those she interacts with, seeing the connections she's able to forge despite her social difficulties. And there are these moments where someone around her shares something with her that's special to them. For instance, one character takes her on top of a building to see a beautiful view of the sunset, which had been shown to her by her older brother. And Violet will have these light bulb moments where she'll just get it. No words, just understanding and feeling. Again, it's really hard to articulate because it's not doing a specific technical thing that I can really nail down. It's just tailoring the entire experience to be one of pure emotion. Violet Evergarden is extraordinarily effective in its character writing and manages to do a lot without a whole lot of runtime. And this show actually ended up being my favorite of the 64 anime I watched for this video, and part 1. If you like character stuff, and if you're subscribed to my channel, you probably do, then you need to watch this show. I don't use this term lightly, but I would consider Violet Evergarden a masterpiece. Easiest fucking S tier of my life. 2019, Kimetsu no Yaiba or Demon Slayer. Demon Slayer is in the unenviable position of being a modern shonen with a plucky good boy protagonist that has to follow Violet fucking Evergarden. Though to be fair, I actually do like this show quite a bit. And yes, I have watched it before, though I'm not fully caught up. The premise is pretty straightforward. We're in Taisho-era Japan, and the plot kicks off when the protagonist Tanjiro is doing errands in town that keep him out overnight. During this time, his family is attacked by a demon, killing his mother and all but one of his siblings. His little sister Nezuko has been turned into a demon. A member of the Order of Demon Slayers shows up, and the abbreviated version is that he ends up seeing potential in both of them, so he applies some sort of seal to Nezuko that keeps her docile, and refers Tanjiro to his mentor so he can train to become a Demon Slayer himself, and work towards his two motivations: cure Nezuko and get revenge on the demon that killed his family. Speaking of which, the whole thing with the demons is that they're very strong as a baseline. They get stronger as they eat more and more people, and they can only be killed by being beheaded by a specially crafted blade or by being in direct sunlight. Oh, and Tanjiro has a superhuman sense of smell, which is something that remains relevant. Earlier in the video, like over an hour ago, I mentioned that one of my problems with modern shonen is that in the interest of mass appeal, the writing of these shows is often very safe and formulaic. It doesn't take any real risks and sticks to what's been proven to work. This results in a story that's generally going to be good, but lacks the ambition to ever really be great. It raises the floor while lowering the ceiling. Demon Slayer is pretty much the perfect example of what I'm talking about. If you're familiar with some of the more technical elements of writing, a lot of Demon Slayer is going to feel very familiar. Not the actual details of what specifically happens in the plot, but the structure of the overall story. For example, the first small arc of the story is the hero's journey almost to a T. We get the first 6 steps out of 12 in the first 3 episodes, and it's so blatant that if you understand the hero's journey, it's almost impossible to miss. But the thing is, it's competently done. It's very formulaic, but it doesn't fuck it up. The hero's journey is a tried and true story structure, and though its usage has changed over time, we can see variations of that basic structure in folklore and mythology going back as far as the fucking Epic of Gilgamesh, which is 4,000 years old. There's a reason that this same basic idea has survived so long. It's an effective foundation for a story, and many writers will use it as a loose framework and then explore more ambitious ideas by twisting and subverting individual pieces. Demon Slayer doesn't subvert shit. It sticks to the script and it's compelling, but it's also not doing anything particularly special. That being said, there is something that sets Demon Slayer apart from other modern shonen series. It nails basically all the technical parts of an anime. Demon Slayer was made by Ufotable, who are known for going all out in their animations, pouring tons of skill and money into a product that pretty much always comes out incredibly polished. Demon Slayer is a visually stunning show. Ufotable will regularly use CG animation, not as a way to cut corners like some other studios do, but in order to push the boundaries of what's possible. There are so many camera effects, beautiful shots showcasing the entirety of a 3D space, the lighting is great, and the fight choreography is top-notch even in these early episodes. And having watched the show before, I know that the fight scenes tend to get better over time. It's true that Demon Slayer is pretty bog standard as an exercise in storytelling, but goddamn is it a fun show to watch, and the story is at least good enough to keep you invested. If you had to pick a stereotypical modern shonen to watch, this is what I'd recommend. I honestly find myself not really caring that the story isn't doing anything all that special because I'm having such a good time. Do I wish the story didn't play it so safe? Of course. But I do think the other elements of the show managed to set Demon Slayer apart from many of its contemporaries. A tier. 2020, Jujutsu Kaisen. This really is the decade of shonen, isn't it? I'm not going to go into the whole speech again, but Jujutsu Kaisen is another modern shonen with many of the same positives and negatives I've already discussed. Though I will say that none of the others had the main character eating a finger. The premise of this anime is that there are supernatural monsters called curses that show up and kill people. It's all vaguely mystical and not fully explained as of episode 3. There are also cursed objects that attract curses. The curses will try to eat the objects to grow their power. Our protagonist Yuji is a high schooler who is absurdly athletically gifted. I'm talking could break Olympic records in basically every category despite doing zero training. For reasons I'm gonna mostly skip over, seriously, this video is already longer than part 1 and I really want to get this fucking thing finished. Yuji comes into contact with an extremely powerful cursed finger, which attracts both curses and a Jujutsu sorcerer who uses magic to fight curses. While fighting a powerful curse, Yuji eats the finger to prevent the curse from doing the same, absorbs its cursed energy, and now also has a demon in his body. Short version is, the finger belonged to the legendary demon called Sukuna. Normally, any person who ate one would just die. Rarely, they'd be strong enough to live and would end up possessed by Sukuna. In Yuji's case, he's strong enough to fully suppress Sukuna and maintain control of his own body. Shortly after all this, the higher-ups of the Jujutsu sorcerers decide that Yuji needs to die because his cursed energy is dangerous. However, since killing someone who survived eating one of the fingers is the only way they know to actually destroy them, they give him the choice of delaying his execution until they can collectively locate and retrieve all 20 of the fingers. They don't know that they'll ever find another person like Yuji again, so this is possibly their only chance to actually destroy the fingers instead of just containing them. So he joins the sorcerers and they go off to fight curses together. The first 3 episodes are pretty much entirely devoted to setting up the plot and introducing the main cast. There's not a whole lot of deeper story or character stuff just yet, so I can't really say how seriously the story treats its characters. In essence, these 3 episodes are the hook, and there's a lot of action and light comedy to keep a new audience invested, and I'd be lying if I said it wasn't fun. Again, as much as I criticize modern shonen, they do pretty much always end up being an enjoyable experience. The fight scenes are fun, the main cast is very weird and have some fun banter back and forth, while also showing glimpses of deeper kindness and care that make them fundamentally likable. When it comes to motivations, we only really have Yuji's so far. That being that his grandfather's dying wish was that he always make an effort to go help people where he can. When it's your time to go, make sure you're surrounded by people. Don't end up like me. I actually really fucking like that line, and as much as Jujutsu Kaisen isn't doing a whole lot just yet, this was a really solid character moment, even though that character dies 11 minutes into the first episode. They basically speedran the whole crotchety old man is actually a good person dealing with emotional pain character trope and did it surprisingly well. In any case, that final wish pushes Yuji to take the opportunity to help destroy the fingers, since not only can he help people that way, but he's the only one who can help people in that particular way. Pretty solid foundation for a protagonist. Let's hope it gets expanded upon. We also do get hints of the motivations for the token tsundere of the group Nobara, but that's clearly meant to just tease the audience with something that's going to be more explained later on, so I can't really comment on it just yet. By the end of episode 3, the main cast has formed, or at least I assume that's everyone because the group feels pretty complete as is. They went on one excursion together, and while they do bicker and clash, they've established a baseline of respect and can move forward from here. At the end of the day, it's a modern shonen. It could definitely get way better as the writing develops, or it could remain fun but mid. I just can't say which direction it's leaning in at the moment. I enjoyed my time with it, but it doesn't scratch my particular itch. B tier. 2021, Horimiya. We're taking a break from shonen with another slice of life anime. If you haven't figured it out by now, I love character-driven storytelling. Cool, exciting plots are great and everything, but the characters are what really bring a story together. And after so many shonen in such a short time, I was more than ready for some slice of life, which is a genre that can be described as character-driven storytelling in its most undiluted form. The premise of Horimiya is simple but compelling. The name Horimiya itself is a portmanteau of our two protagonists, Hori and Miyamura. The two are classmates who don't really interact. There's no animosity or anything, but their social reputations tend to push them in opposite directions. Hori is the quintessential anime popular girl. Pretty, kind, intelligent, and liked by everyone. Meanwhile, Miyamura is the gloomy, reserved, quiet, nerdy type. Nobody has any problems with him, but neither are they close to him. However, both are essentially living double lives. Hori has to take care of her brother at home due to how much her single mother works, so in contrast to her social position as the perfect girl who's approachable but unobtainable, she lives her life like a working-class mother would and prioritizes getting shit done over appearances. Meanwhile, Miyamura here in America would be considered moderately alternative, though it's definitely much more striking in Japan. He lets his longish hair flow freely and has multiple tattoos and piercings. And for those of you who aren't familiar, there's still a major stigma against tattoos in Japan since they historically were mostly only seen on Yakuza members. The two have a chance encounter one afternoon, and they very quickly end up bonding over their shared secret, and pretty much instantly become really close friends. Both appreciate having a peer that they can be themselves around. Also, Miyamura becomes somewhat of an older brother figure for Hori's little brother. And that's pretty much everything you need to know about what this show is doing. It sets up this dynamic and simply explores how it evolves over time. The conflicts are incredibly low stakes and can often be outright silly, though they all serve a purpose. For example, half of the second episode is dedicated to the fact that Hori doesn't know Miyamura's first name. She unsuccessfully tries to figure out his name without having to ask him, and it's funny while also highlighting the core point that she genuinely cares about this guy, and feels like a bad friend for not knowing something so basic about him. There are multiple comedic moments throughout this whole thing, but it all leads up to a moment of realization where she sees that all her agonizing was kinda pointless. At the end of the day, the only consequence was a bit of light teasing. He wasn't upset with her, he wasn't judging her, he didn't think any less of her. And in a fraction of a second, everything becomes okay in her mind and she's laughing along with him. It's subtle, but it really does a lot to make these two feel like real people. Now, the story is very clearly going to have a romantic angle. The third episode made that abundantly clear, but it's only just started on that path. Though the development of their friendship did an excellent job setting it up, so that it feels like a natural development rather than something just made because it's a romance story. But it's also really nice in the way that these two have developed their friendship, the story would still work with the two of them just being friends, and I think that's really solid writing. There's other stuff this anime does, including a look into Miyamura's self-esteem issues, but I think I've pretty much made my point. Look, I like slice of life in general and good characters. Horimiya is exactly that, but on a more fundamental level, it just feels real, which I think is the goal of slice of life. S tier. 2022, Chainsaw Man. We're back to shonen, but I'm not going to say what you're probably expecting me to say. That's because Chainsaw Man isn't the type of generic shonen that frustrates me. It's a fucking weird anime, but I don't mean that as an insult. This anime is unique, and it just hits different to most other battle shonen. And for the record, I have seen the show before and read about that far in the manga. The premise of the show is that the world is full of devils, which are creatures born of the human mind and human fear. There's a devil for every kind of thing that can be imagined. It can be based on a simple object, or it can be an abstract concept. No two are alike, but there is one thing they all share. The more fear their core thing inspires, the more powerful the devil is. For example, the first hostile devil we see is the Tomato Devil, which is very weak because nobody's really afraid of tomatoes. But we also see things like the Zombie Devil, the Blood Devil, the Angel Devil, the Time Devil, the Gun Devil. Most devils are strictly hostile, others are more chill. Some devils are willing to form contracts with humans, granting them some kind of power in exchange for something. Usually they get to eat a body part, but sometimes the agreements are more creative. Our protagonist is Denji, a teenager in debt to the Yakuza. He basically kept the Chainsaw Devil as a pet, who later fused with him, giving him chainsaw powers. Soon after, he's basically voluntold to become a devil hunter for the government. There are two overarching things about this show that really reel me in. The first is the most obvious. Outrageous levels of fun factor. I know I'm the kind of guy who likes to cut past the surface level and examine what writers do with the unique stories they tell, but nothing can possibly distract from the fact that Chainsaw Man is absolutely batshit insane both in the action and in the humor. Denji pulls a ripcord in his chest and his head literally turns into a chainsaw with shark teeth while two more chainsaw blades sprout from his arms, allowing him to go on over-the-top bloodthirsty killing sprees. Denji's also a very simple person, and by that I don't mean stupid. Actually, forget I said that. He's fucking stupid, and he basically has the mindset of a 10-year-old since he never had the chance to really grow up. His biggest goal in life is to touch boobs. When he gets into a fight with a person he's not trying to kill, his only strategy is to repeatedly kick them in the balls. He'll do dumb shit for pocket change with a smile on his face. And he partners with Power, the Blood Devil, who is also stupid and hates everything except for her cat, Meowie. Whatever dumb bullshit you're imagining these two might get up to is probably realistic for this anime. So start to finish, the show is pure entertainment. It's funny, it's silly, there's gratuitous but incredibly well choreographed and animated violence. The show hooks you in and does not let go. But there's another thing it does that I find really interesting. Everything is done from an unusual perspective, so you don't really know how something is going to be presented. Denji spent his entire life living in squalor trying to pay back an impossible debt that wasn't even his to begin with. He sold multiple body parts, killed devils for barely any money, and sometimes would eat no more than a slice of bread for the day. All to end with him being backstabbed and left for dead by the Yakuza. Being a government devil hunter sucks, but not from Denji's point of view. Sure, he's being transparently manipulated by his Machiavellian psychopath of a boss. Sure, he's risking life and limb on a daily basis. Sure, he's not ever allowed to leave his job under the threat of death. None of that matters because he gets to eat food that tastes good until he's full. He gets to take baths and sleep in a bed. He gets to be near multiple pretty women. He gets regular wages. Sure, the whole situation sucks, but Denji's used to things sucking in a hell of a lot more, so this is a win. The entire framing of the setting shifts from what you'd expect. Normally, a setting like this would be nothing but grim, harsh, and depressing, but it's framed as a positive thing because of Denji. And once you accept that idea, that things aren't going to be what you expect, it leans the fuck into it. It hints at familiar tropes purely as a red herring. It actually puts me at a disadvantage because I have such an interest in understanding writing. Because I know how things usually work, that makes it harder for me to predict anything because its plan is to do literally anything except for what it should, and I love it. I can't even really give any examples without spoilers, so you'll just have to take my word for it. Is it a masterpiece of storytelling? Not really. There's potential there, but no guarantee it'll hold up long term. But is it a fun time? Fuck yes. Honestly, you owe it to yourself to watch Chainsaw Man. It's not perfect, but man is it fun. A tier. 2023, Soso no Frieren, or Frieren Beyond Journey's End. Frieren was the anime I was most excited to watch on this entire list, and the reason is simple. Everybody I've heard talk about it fucking loves it, and even people with vastly different tastes in anime agree that it's really good. And after watching the first 3 episodes for myself, yeah, this show's excellent. Frieren takes place in a somewhat stereotypical fantasy world where the hero and his party must go on an adventure to defeat the Demon King that's threatening to throw the world into chaos. We've all seen this a million times. But Frieren takes place after that adventure. The Demon King has been defeated and the series opens on the party traveling home. Here we step into the perspective of the titular Frieren, an elven mage who is the primary spellcaster of the hero's party. As an elf, Frieren has an insanely long lifespan. Exact numbers aren't given at this point, but it's safe to say that elves can live thousands of years. So for her, the decade she spent with the party is really just a blip. When she promises to visit in 50 years for a meteor shower, that's no big deal to her. She's pretty emotionally detached because this is such a small portion of her life, and she's pretty clearly introverted on top of that. But then, after the party reunites and goes on one last adventure to watch that meteor shower, the hero Himmel dies of old age, having lived a long and happy life. And as he's being buried, we see the reason this story exists. Frieren's first outward display of emotion is to cry and ask herself why she didn't take the time to know this man better. Fucking gut-wrenching moment, by the way. Without even knowing much about her, I had a physical reaction to it. She then makes the decision to try to understand people, to value her companions in the moment. The journey truly begins several years later when she visits another party member in the final years of his life and takes on his adopted daughter Fern as an apprentice who joins her on her journey. Frieren is basically a slice-of-life story pretending to be an adventure story, and it's all about Frieren forging a bond with Fern while trying to process her complicated emotions surrounding the adventure that she took for granted. Like many of the other character-focused anime I've already talked about, a lot of what this show does is hard to explain without you experiencing it directly, because it wants to share its moments with you and have you feel the story as it unfolds. That's the central thing I find most compelling about Frieren, and it's the thing that's the most difficult to really express in a video like this. But one thing I can talk about is how while we've probably all seen stories about a withdrawn character going on an emotional journey to establish interpersonal connections, Frieren does it in a way that's not particularly common, and it's really subtle about it. Most characters like this are, for lack of a better term, emotionally ignorant. They not only find it hard to understand those around them, but they need to better understand themselves before they can truly find the fulfillment they're seeking. In contrast, Frieren is shockingly introspective. Seriously, she's able to properly assess her emotional state, her thought processes, and her weaknesses. So her emotional journey is not the aimless searching of other similar stories, but a focused journey where she already has a strong idea of what she wants to do, at least in a metaphorical sense. There's a line in episode 2 that really highlights this. Frieren and Fern went to a village where a statue of Himmel had fallen into disrepair. As part of the restoration, Frieren wants to use magic to create a grove of Himmel's favorite flower around his statue. That species hasn't been seen in the area for decades, but she searches for months nonetheless. Fern can tell this is very important to her and asks a very simple question. Is this for Sir Himmel? And immediately, Frieren's response was, no. I think this is for myself. For a character who has so much trouble connecting with people, you wouldn't expect her to have that level of self-awareness. Most characters in that position would say they're doing it for their fallen friend, but Frieren understands that this is for her own closure. That was a real holy shit moment for me, and it was then that the show went from something that was good to something I could tell was really special. We've barely scratched the surface as of episode 3, and already we're seeing some incredible things. I mentioned that Violet Evergarden was my favorite anime of the list, but I really wouldn't be surprised if Frieren ends up blowing it out of the water as the story develops further. You don't see writing of this caliber every day. S tier. 2024, Solo Leveling. Solo Leveling is in my opinion the quintessential overglazed shonen. In particular, COVID weebs fucking love this anime. As you may have already guessed, I have pretty much the same opinion about Solo Leveling as I do for most other modern shonen. It's good, but not great. I see why people like this show, but not why people love this show. The premise is actually very interesting. We're in a modern setting, but one where portals to alternate dimensions have opened up. Fantasy creatures like goblins and demons come through them. They can't be hurt by regular weapons, but the portals also allow a portion of the population to gain powers that let them fit into the role of a fantasy RPG character like a warrior or a mage. And those abilities can hurt the monsters. Additionally, the portals lead to dungeons where there are resources that can be made into magical items that can also hurt monsters. So there's a very video gamey core world building that actually makes sense in a modern setting. It's neat that in a world with guns and tanks, it still makes sense for someone to fight with a sword and shield. Our protagonist Jinwoo is one of the people who managed to get powers, but he's arguably the weakest one. This is basically just bad luck, but it means that his natural abilities make even the easiest dungeons a struggle, and he's unable to earn enough to buy anything but the most bare bones equipment. Also, once your powers awaken, there's generally no way to increase them. So it really does just come down to chance. Despite his disadvantages, Jinwoo chooses to hunt in dungeons rather than get a normal job because his mother needs expensive medical treatment and his sister's tuition isn't going to pay itself. While he and a raiding party are working their way through a relatively low-level dungeon, they come across an extra dungeon path. They decide to go in for more loot, but end up way out of their depth. The room they find ends up being essentially a puzzle boss, and Jinwoo ends up solving every stage of the riddle. Through a combination of mostly death but some escapes, Jinwoo manages to be the only one to beat the boss and is rewarded by essentially being given an RPG leveling system. Through daily questing, which at this point is pretty much just basic conditioning, actually it's literally the training regimen Saitama does in One Punch Man, he's able to gain skill points that augment his physical capabilities, though he learns the hard way that there are harsh penalties for failing the quest. As of episode 3, we're pretty much only just past the setup for all this, so the story hasn't really moved forward yet. Now look, as a gamer myself, I do really like the core concept for this anime. As much as the gaming thing is a gimmick, it's a well-executed one. Hell, the gaming thing is the reason I watched as much of Sword Art Online as I did, and that was not done nearly as well. I'm not going to pretend I didn't have fun with this show, and I certainly acknowledge that it's flashy and exciting. The show looks great, and the foundations we got for Jinwoo and his motivations were enough to keep me interested. But so far on a writing level, it's really nothing particularly special. That may change as things progress, because again, we're basically only at square one, but very little stands out to me outside of the admittedly clever usage of the video gaming nature of everything. The one thing set up that I do think has potential is that one of Jinwoo's friends was a high-ish ranked healer who only did easy dungeons since she had too much anxiety to face anything more challenging. She was part of that dungeon party from earlier and escaped, but developed severe PTSD and had to go to a psych ward. I really hope they explore her struggles as well as her relationship with Jinwoo, because there's a lot of good stuff that can happen there. In particular, I feel like this is begging for a conflict where she tries to stop Jinwoo from dungeon delving despite his growing strength, since she always worried about him and also literally has trauma from thinking he had died. But time will tell if that actually happens. While I can't say a whole lot about if the writing is good, as that really depends on how things progress, I do have to point out something that kind of annoys me. When Jinwoo fails a daily quest, he's forced to do a penalty where a huge monster is trying to kill him and he has to survive for several hours. The anime just kind of breezes past that, completely killing the pacing and tension that segment was supposed to bring, while also kind of breaking my immersion, since it doesn't really make sense that he was able to survive for multiple hours given what was shown on screen. Relatively minor complaint, but it bugged me. But at the end of the day, solo leveling falls into the category of just being fun, but not anything super special. I'll probably end up watching the rest of it since I really do like the core premise, but it still has all the trappings of modern shonen. B tier. 2025 Sakamoto Days. The final anime of this video is one I describe as a superpowered action sitcom. The premise is simple. The titular Sakamoto is a John Wick-style assassin, just a little less realistic and a little more anime. He falls in love, leaves his life of crime, starts a family, and gets fat. Now he owns a convenience store and lives a normal life as a pillar of the local community. However, he's still just as capable as ever, and he has no problem dealing with the people sent to kill him for abandoning the Yakuza. So here's the thing. This is 100% meant to be a popcorn anime. It's not doing deep, intricate storytelling, but it's also not pretending to be something it isn't. It's meant to be relatively lighthearted fun, and there's absolutely a place for this type of entertainment, and I honestly had a great time with it. The action is actually really well choreographed and animated, and it takes a different approach than you'd expect. Sakamoto made a promise to his wife that he'd never kill again, so he goes out of his way to use non-lethal methods of combat, such as a makeshift slingshot made out of rubber bands and a cough drop, or how he caught a bullet with a pair of chopsticks as he rushes in with a taser. It's silly, but it's also really clever because it's not straightforward. It forces the writers to think outside the box, and it's engaging just by its nature. The comedy is also pretty good, typically playing on the absurdist premise of a legendary assassin living a normal working-class family man lifestyle, while also doing things like fucking with the telepath who was sent to kill him by imagining killing him, which he sees in his mind. That telepath ends up working at the convenience store, by the way. Is it laugh out loud funny? No, not really, but it's consistently entertaining, and I could absolutely see myself putting this on and watching a few episodes to relax after a long day at work. And while the story isn't particularly serious and isn't pretending to be, it does have a few moments of genuine emotion to get you to actually care about these characters. In particular, there was a moment in the first episode where the telepath is knocked out after unsuccessfully trying to kill Sakamoto, and when he wakes up, the family invites him to dinner. As soon as he takes a bite, he's overcome with emotion because of how good it feels to eat a home-cooked meal made with love and care. He immediately has this moment of, holy shit, I get it now. It was funny, but also really heartwarming. And again, the point was to spend just enough time with stuff like this that we actually care about these characters and want them to be happy. Honestly, I could talk about more things this show does, but what I already said pretty much tells you all you really need to know about Sakamoto Days. This is a fun show. I'd recommend it. A tier. So between this video and part 1, that's 64 anime stretching all the way back from 1962 to 2025. But before I show off the final rankings, I have something extra to show you. Back when I still thought this was only going to be one video, I had a little voting tournament on my community tab to see what my audience thought was the best. Since it's 64 anime, the numbers lined up perfectly. So I used a random number generator to put the anime into groups of 4, and then put the winners of each group into a single elimination tournament to see which one my community thought was best. Here's how that went. I'm going to blitz through it for the sake of time, but feel free to pause to see the results if you want. Also, keep in mind that these screenshots were taken as I was editing this video, and so are slightly different to how they were when the winners were decided. The winners of the 16 groups of 4 were Frieren, Urusei Yatsura, Devilman, Fullmetal Alchemist, Angel Beats, Fairy Tail, Berserk, Cowboy Bebop, One Piece, Neon Genesis Evangelion, Sailor Moon S, Mobile Suit Gundam, Death Note, Fist of the North Star, Violet Evergarden, and Ranma 1/2. In the first round of the tournament stage, Berserk beat Ranma, Cowboy Bebop beat Fist of the North Star, Violet Evergarden beat Devilman, Angel Beats beat Fairy Tail, Frieren beat Urusei Yatsura, Neon Genesis Evangelion beat Death Note, Fullmetal Alchemist beat Mobile Suit Gundam, and Sailor Moon S beat One Piece. In the quarterfinals, Berserk beat Cowboy Bebop, Violet Evergarden beat Angel Beats, though the votes actually evened out after the fact. In a move that surprised me, Neon Genesis Evangelion pretty handily beat Frieren, and Fullmetal Alchemist beat Sailor Moon S. In the semifinals, Berserk beat Violet Evergarden, and Neon Genesis Evangelion beat Fullmetal Alchemist, both by a significant margin. And in the finals, it originally looked like Neon Genesis Evangelion was going to win pretty handily, but there was a massive surge in votes and Berserk ended up completely reversing it and winning the tournament. So my audience chose Berserk as the best anime on the list. And now for the final rankings. I'm going to include the anime from part 1 as well. In the unrankable tier, we have Otogi Manga Calendar, Candy Candy, and Sailor Moon S. In the D tier, we have Big X and Dear Brother. In C tier, we have Osomatsu-kun, Doraemon, Space Runaway Ideon, Macross, Samurai Troopers, Naruto, Fairy Tail, and Sword Art Online. In B tier, we have Kimba the White Lion, Speed Racer, Lupin the Third, UFO Robo Grendizer, Mobile Suit Gundam, Flash Kicker, Touch, Detective Conan, InuYasha, Hellsing, Bleach, Hunter x Hunter, Tokyo Ghoul, My Hero Academia, Black Clover, Jujutsu Kaisen, and Solo Leveling. In A tier, we have Astro Boy, Cyborg 009, Tomorrow's Joe, Devilman, Voltes 5, Dragon Ball, City Hunter, Nadia the Secret of Blue Water, Slam Dunk, Cowboy Bebop, One Piece, Gurren Lagann, One Punch Man, Demon Slayer, Chainsaw Man, and Sakamoto Days. And finally, up in S tier, we have Dororo, Heidi, Girl of the Alps, Future Boy Conan, Urusei Yatsura, Fist of the North Star, Ranma 1/2, Yu Hakusho, Neon Genesis Evangelion, Berserk, Fullmetal Alchemist, Mushishi, Death Note, Toradora, Angel Beats, Attack on Titan, Violet Evergarden, Horimiya, and Frieren Beyond Journey's End. So there we have it. After several months and probably about 300 hours of work on my part if I had to guess, we finally have a good version of the Anime Men's Anime History tier list. As much as it was a real pain to make, it was a lot of fun, and I feel really good about it. But I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. How would you have ranked these yourself? What changes when you take more than the first 3 episodes into consideration? I'm curious to see what you all think. Thanks for watching. Big thank you to my channel members, especially my $10 members Bulk Squat Thrust, President Irina Vladimirovna Putina, and Robert Lay. All members got to see this video early, so if that's something that interests you, become a member via the join button below for as little as $1 a month. Also, please like the video and subscribe for more. It really does help. I got a lot of plans moving forward, and I can't wait to show you what's coming. And lastly, don't forget that if you're watching this on release, I've got my VTuber debut stream over on the Ads VT channel today at 1 PM Eastern Standard Time. Hope to see you there. Once again, thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next time. Play the Electro Swing.
Hit the road, Jack, and don't you come back no